All right, good morning. Notice of time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by notifying the Omaha World Herald and the Nebraska Press Association, OPPD outlets newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the first level of Blue Cross Blue Shield, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on September 12th, 2025. A copy of the proposed agenda for this meeting has been maintained on a current basis and is readily available for public inspection in the office of the district's corporate secretary. Additionally, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is available for inspection on OPPD.com and in this meeting room. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder to those joining us on WebEx, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Our agenda for today's meeting is as follows. We'll conduct a closed session this morning to discuss one topic, strategic risk, resource adequacy. We'll conclude this morning's closed session no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to open the WebEx meeting to allow the public and OPPD staff to join. We'll begin public session at approximately 10 a.m. and receive reports from each committee. Director Wagner, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
We do. I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 8:02 a.m. to discuss one topic, strategic risk, resource adequacy. With respect to strategic risk, resource adequacy, a closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest because the discussion involves sensitive utility infrastructure information, confidential cost information, and potential resource acquisition strategies. The disclosure of which would disadvantage the district in future negotiations with potential contractors.
All right, this motion requires a second.
Second.
Ms. Lane?
Director Wagner?
Yes.
Director Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Director Court?
Yes.
Director Howard?
Yes.
Director Hudson?
Yes.
Director Moody?
Yes.
Director Spurgeon?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you. The motion to go into closed session is passed. This closed session will be limited to one topic, strategic risk, resource adequacy. No votes or other board action will be taken. All right, welcome everyone. A motion and second is required to reconvene in open session.
So move.
Second.
Yes.
Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Ford?
Yes.
Howard? Yes. Hudson? Moody?
Yes.
Spurgeon?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right, thank you. The motion to come out of closed session at 10:03 a.m. is carried. This closed session was limited to discussion regarding one topic, strategic risk, resource adequacy. No votes or other board actions were taken. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by notifying the Omaha World Herald and the Nebraska Press Association, OPPD outlets newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the first level of Blue Cross Blue Shield, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on September 12, 2025. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder to those joining us on WebEx, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. Members of the public, thank you for attending the meeting. You're in listen-only mode. If you have technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. We'll take public comments at the end of today's meeting, as well as the board meeting on September 18th, 2025, which will be conducted in person at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center and begin at 5 p.m. The public may attend in person or remotely via WebEx by going to OPPD.com. Joining me today in person are my fellow board members, Amanda Wagner, Mike Kavanaugh, Sarah Howard, John Hudson, Craig Moody, Mary Spurgeon, and Eric Williams. We also have members of our executive leadership team, Tim Thalkin with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm, our general counsel, and OPPD staff. Additionally, we currently have about 20 attendees in this meeting, consisting of OPPD employees and members of the public. Today, we'll begin with committee reports. The agenda is a little bit different from years past, but looking forward to this new model. So we'll start with committee reports and review of board work plan items presented by the following directors. Director Spurgeon will report on governance, Director Wagner on risk, Director Williams on system management and nuclear oversight, Director Howard on customer and public engagement, and Director Moody on finance. Following the committee reports, we'll move into presentations on oversight and monitoring, financial stewardship, and governance and board matters. We'll conclude the day with public comments, followed by a closed session focused on strategic governance issues. And now Josh could give the safety briefing, please.
And everyone, this is a little bit different. So thanks for coming. Welcome to today's meeting at OPPD. We're committed to fostering a safe, secure, and respectful environment for all participants. To support this commitment, we begin each meeting with a few important reminders regarding our physical, psychological, and also our digital safety. If you're experiencing any illness, please prioritize your well-being, stay home, rest, stay hydrated, and attend any necessary medical appointments. Wherever we're joining from, whether it's virtual or in person, we always encourage people to have access to emergency exits, which we do have the emergency exit right here. You can use this fire door, however, it'll walk you right back down to this main entrance here. If we had to exit for any reason, we'd all congregate in the north parking lot there so we could have accountability and make sure everyone's safe. In the event of any weather, we would go into the weather shelters here, just outside of the room here where we'd be escorted by our security staff outside. So make sure that we follow their directions in that event, but I think we're safe today. If assistance is needed at any point, please go ahead and raise your hand, speak up, or just ask for assistance. We have first aid, AED, and extra supplies outside, so we'll get help as quickly as possible. Cybersecurity, we want to make sure that we're exercising caution when we see suspicious emails or unknown links. Avoid clicking on content that seems untrustworthy. And then here at OPPD, we have a little fish button that we have handy to us on our Outlook that we can always hit. And our cybersecurity teams do a very good job of investigating that. We want to make sure that all participants uphold the following principles at all of our meetings. We want to make sure that we speak and interact with respect, embrace constructive conflict, value diverse perspectives, build trust through transparency, and foster a culture of curiosity and continuous learning. We want to always remember OPPD's core values. We have a passion to serve, we honor our community, and we care about each other. So thank you very much and have a great meeting.
All right, thanks, Josh. On to Director Spurgeon.
Thank you, Chair Core. As we met, Governance Street Committee met on September 9th for an hour. Usual safety briefing and a little look at what had transpired last month that was taken care of. Then we looked at the 2026 board meeting schedule, which we're going to review later today in this meeting. A little overview of the board workshop that was held in August. And during that time, we talked about how do we want to move forward to make our meetings more effective and efficient. And so for those of you who tune into this program every month, you're going to notice we are in a little different agenda order here. And that has come out of those discussions. Ethics reporting item, I affirmed that no one had contacted me regarding any ethics violation on the part of any member of the board. We then looked at the governance committee planning calendar and looked at what sorts of things we're going to be addressing in the next months. The board work plan, which one of the items from the board workshop will land particularly on the governance's plate to continue with. We had a little summary of the meeting, which had a few action items, as I recall. And then we did a bit of a new thing. We had about 10 minutes left at the end of all the business. And so we allowed all staff to go, and we just had the executive leadership team and board members there to have a conversation, to share what was keeping them up at night, or questions about things that were on our minds. And so that was very helpful. It was the first time we tried that with governance committee, and I think we'll continue. It seemed to be effective. And that ended our meeting. Back to you. Yeah.
All right. Any comments on the board work plan?
Oh, yes, we are. Well, these are things that are coming up. I guess some of it are on track, and we're continuing with that. The one that's the developing a plan for strategic education and training. Director Moody and I have said that we will develop a working group to advance that, because that's been on our plate for a while, and it's up to us to move that on. I think that the piloting a GB / VL process, that's really beginning this month as well. And I envision that continuing on in the months ahead. So the refining the board policy development process that will come about, hasn't been started yet, but I think that will happen. And continued discussion about understanding the corporate secretary role for OPPD, which involves about 3 people at this time. So we'll be continuing to talk about that. And board work plan process again is we're going to play with some new ideas and some new ways of doing things.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move on to Director Bogner for Risk-Free Committee.
All right, thank you. The Risk Committee met for our quarterly meeting on September 9th at 3 p.m. All committee members were present for the majority of the meeting. We spent the first 45 minutes of the meeting discussing a proposed format and dashboard that may inform how the Risk Committee executes our functions in the future. Generally, the board has always had line of sight to the risks, and the ELT and our corporate risk group deem as most critical. But internally, these are referred to as red risks. For the public's benefit, I'll highlight that the enterprise risk management framework is robust at the district. However, the board has previously reviewed these in closed session, and this ERM is not made public. Being in the Risk Committee's inaugural year of forming, we're still storming and forming around how we do this committee work. And so Mr. Foch and his team have created a dashboard for our consideration, and I would encourage the non-committee board members to review the framework that's being proposed. You can find that in the Risk Committee documents. Our discussion around this framework really revolved around how the board defines and communicates risk appetite, and we also discussed the board's role in risk oversight. During the meeting, we also received the results of the 2025 NERC audit. And so I would also love to point you towards that. We were given 2 positive observations, which are fairly rare. And so I would love to point you to that and congratulate the district on receiving those. We also received a report on the Q2 corporate audits that have been conducted. And then this morning we had a closed risk session, which will continue this afternoon. But today during our public session, we'll review SD10, the ethics monitoring report. During our risk committee, we also briefly reviewed and affirmed that the proposed revisions for GP14 and BL2 are ready for full board review and consideration. GP14 will be addressed today, and we can expect to see BL2 come forward in October. Finally, we concluded with open discussion time between board members and present ELT members. This open discussion time was an outcome of our recent board workshop, and I have 2 observations to share with the rest of the board. First, the ELT expressed interest in the board offering more recognition more frequently. We always want to know when we are doing things well, and so I encourage you all to find opportunities to share that. And then the second is it would be helpful to hear from the board when things are good enough, meaning, in my view, we should look for opportunities for when we have enough information to move forward with making a decision and share that with ELT so that they know additional work and efforts not required for that particular item. So would any of my committee members like to make any other comments? So that's my report. I think the board work plan, the only thing on here is GP14, which we'll talk about today. So we're on track and making progress.
Great, thank you very much. On to Director Williams, please.
Great. Systems Committee met on September 4th. The agenda and topics covered are on screen, on Diligent, and in the public package available, 8 of 77. No comments on the work plan. SD9 monitoring report will be presented later today. Are there any comments or questions? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Howard.
The Customer and Public Engagement Committee met on September 8th. We went over the customer growth update, the customer experience and engagement approach, and we went over the LR234 testimony. And that is what we did. And then for our work plan, we have SD11, and we are putting together a work plan for that on Friday. So that's moving forward.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Director Moody.
Thank you, Director Core. Our committee met on September 5th. All 4 members were present. There are a couple things that I do want to linger on here for just a moment that are not part of our committee discussion today. The first is item 3, our financial stewardship update. So Mr. Underwood gave us kind of an overview of the financial work that the district has been doing to reduce costs over the course of this year. You all know that there's been a $60 million target for us to hit, so as to, for context for our ratepayers, $15 million in expense equals about a 1% rate increase. So the goal here was to reduce that to minimize the potential for rate increase and to hit our 2.0 debt service coverage target. The work is going extraordinarily well. At the time, the total was about $53 million in savings, which is an extraordinary effort. There was a really good conversation about not only what kinds of activities and expenses have been reduced, but also what the impact on the organization has been. So we didn't want to just turn a blind eye to the fact that cutting expenses has implications. So there's a lot of really good information in the deck there for those board members that aren't on the finance committee. I encourage you to go take a look. But it was a good summary of the great work that they're doing, and we're on track for 2.0 debt service coverage going into next year. The next one is a heads up for, again, the non-finance committee members that there is a rate change on the horizon for us. And so that's item number 4, as you see up here. Broadly speaking, what I'll describe here is there's currently the opportunity for a certain class of customers who are commercial and industrial demand rate structures that allows them to change rates without changing their usage characteristics. They can only do it every 12 months, but for us, there are some implications that reduce revenue, and it makes it hard to maintain consistency in these rate classes. So the team has been doing a good job of examining what the right approach is to address some of this happening. Brattle was pulled in and did an assessment that was shared with the committee as well. So there's a rate action on the horizon that relates to this. You'll have an opportunity to get into greater detail when it's in front of us here in a month or two. If you're curious now, there's a lot of really good information and diligent for you to dive in. Finance committee asked some really good questions, and generally speaking, I think felt pretty comfortable with the direction everything is heading. So good work happening there as well. Otherwise, as was consistent in most of the other committee meetings, we had a nice roundtable with our CFO, Mr. Underwood, which was a great discussion, really, really valuable, and we're looking forward to doing it on the basis as well. So that's the committee in terms of the work plan. Going to the next slide, please. That is not us. It's like board assignment SMNO. It's okay. We did have one that related to keeping abreast of potential changes to SD2. It had been put on the work plan, I think, probably 3 years ago. And so there it is. It's dark.
It's labeled incorrectly.
In essence, what we decided is to let it go. It's not providing any value. It was really, as we understand it, named as a trigger for us to ensure that we're considering any changes to SD2 based on all of the shifting rates we're making, changes to rates. We feel like there are plenty of good mechanisms in place already for us to do that. SD2 monitor report alone prompts us at the end of that conversation to say, is there anything that we need to do here? So we don't think that by just getting rid of it, there's any degradation in our ability to stay abreast of what's going on. So the committee said, let's just get rid of it rather than letting it linger indefinitely. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, that's all I've got. Director Core, back to you.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we'll start our section on oversight and monitoring, and to kick it off is Mr. Underwood.
Great. We've got SD9, integrated system planning. We had a good discussion with the systems pre-committee on the monitoring report, and we appreciate their support to advance it to all committee here today for your consideration. This is Dan Lenahan. Dan Lenahan is our Senior Director of Integrated System Planning. So we thought it made sense to let him present the integrated system planning monitoring report. So and appreciate you being here and walking us through the conversation.
Thanks, Brad. So again, Dan Lenahan, Senior Director of Integrated System Planning. So I will be presenting the update on SD9, which is titled Integrated System Planning on our annual monitoring report. So in a nutshell, SD9 prescribes how we perform capacity expansion planning and reliability and resiliency planning of our generation supply and energy delivery infrastructure. There are 6 requirements in the SD. The first 4 are shown here. These are the core requirements for expansion planning. If you go to the next slide. The last 2 requirements are more geared towards providing the board updates on new generation expansion plans. Of particular note, specific updates on our near-term generation expansion plan, which was approved by the board in 2023, which is one of OPPD's largest generation expansion plans on record. So I'm going to spend the rest of this presentation going through the 6 requirements and how we've complied with each of those. If you go to the next slide. Starting with the first requirement. So this is to ensure we comply with the Southwest Power Pool's regional resource adequacy planning reserve margin requirements. So each load serving entity in SPP has to have enough generation supply to meet your forecasted peak demand load, plus a reserve margin on your generation supply above that peak load. The table on the right shows the SPP required reserve margin requirements each and every year for the past 5 years, along with how OPPD has met those reserve margin requirements each of the year for the past 5 years, including the current calendar year of 2025. The SPP planning reserve margin has evolved for the past 5 years. What started out as a 12% reserve margin has now increased to a 15% reserve margin. So the amount of reserves we've had to carry has increased over the last 5 years. And the reserve margin is still going to increase over the next few years. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about how we're planning to meet the 2026 increasing requirements and beyond. So if you go to the next slide. So the graphics on the right are meant to show a forecast of what our current and future generation resources look like compared to the planning reserve margin requirement in SPP, which is evolving again. Again, I mentioned the current reserve margin requirements are 15% for both summer and winter. Over the next 5 years, those are going to increase. The summer is going to increase from 15% to 17% in the 5-year horizon. And the winter reserve margin requirement, which is a more dramatic increase, is going to increase from 15% to 38%. So that is a huge increase in the winter requirements. And these increasing requirements are mostly due to the extreme weather events we've been battling with in this region the past few years, mostly during the winter. So OPPD does have plans to meet these planning reserve margin requirements. We're confident we'll be able to meet them in the near term. Our near-term generation resource plan that the board approved in 2023 is going to be a big part to help us meet these. But we are seeing huge amounts of load growth. We've talked about it quite a bit in this forum. We're continuing to get numerous requests. So as part of our future analysis to make sure we keep meeting this increasing planning reserve margin, we're going to do more resource planning. And our next big resource planning effort is going to come in 2026. It's traditionally been called our integrated resource planning effort. We are now transitioning that to be called the integrated system planning effort, which is going to be a more concerted effort to combine our generation planning along with our T&D planning efforts.
For context, and correct my math here because I'm doing math on the fly, which is dangerous. When I look at the increase from 15 to 17, that's a 2% margin increase in the summer. Our summer peak is about, let's just call it 3,000. So that this change effectively requires us to have 60 megawatts of capacity to serve the same load. So that 2% increase is a 60 megawatt cost, let's say, to resource capacity. In the winter, going from 15 to 38%, that's a 23% increase. So 23% on our winter peak is about 2,000. That's over 400 megawatts of additional capacity that we have to reserve to serve the same customers we're serving today. I'm pointing this out because last year during the COP, there was some discussion about, hey, why the rate increase and what are our customers getting in exchange? Well, it's part of these. These will continue to be part of the story of it. It's costing us more, in this case, capacity to serve the same number of customers, the same load. I just wanted to put that in context, that 400 megawatts and 60 megawatt of additional capacity as a result of these changes in PRN. Is that, am I thinking about it the right way?
Yeah, in general, if we have no more load growth, we have to add more generation capacity to serve the same amount of load due to these reserve margin increases. Yes, that is a great summary and great to know.
Then before you go on to the next slide, can you ground the peak load forecast for us? So in other words, like we've talked a lot about exponential load growth, right? And lots of customers want to come in. But I see a line here and I'm just curious about like, where's the data coming from that informs what our peak load projections are?
Yeah, so load forecasting has been an evolving process at many utilities due to the significant amount of growth that's been coming our way. So this is one of the most recent base forecasts we have, which assumes a kind of a nominal growth rate that we've seen historically, plus includes some of the more recent, very large customer requests that we're receiving. Not every single potential large customer request is in this forecast, but kind of based on a projected hit rate of some of those large customers coming to fruition, that would be included in this load forecast.
I think in general, the last 5 years, we've grown at a 4% CAGR, compounded annual growth rate, 4%. For a utility, that's on a different planet. It's not. And so we generally see that trend continuing. And so just to put a, it's hard to see in the image, just to put a percentage to it. That's how people think.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, in the charts there in the table, the reduction in existing resources, that's the conversion of North Omaha we're seeing reflected in there.
Yeah, so the darker shaded gray would be our existing resources, and you do see the capacity going down. The North Omaha conversion is part of that, along with some other capacity contracts that come to term in that.
So we have capacity contract.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then the lightly shaded gray is notably our near-term generation expansion plan to kind of fill those gaps.
Which is predominantly renewable.
The near-term generation expansion plan, it consists of both renewables and conventional generation, dual fuel combustion turbines primarily. And there's a slide later where I will provide a pretty detailed update on our progress towards the near-term generation plan.
I think another way that we've said this in the past is most of the capacity is coming from the gas. Most of the energy is coming from the renewables.
Can you say that out loud? Sorry, I can't hear.
Yeah, sorry. Most of the capacity is coming from the natural gas, and most of the energy is coming from the renewables.
Thanks.
So that's because of the cost of the gas, operation cost of gas.
Yes, sir. And just more broadly speaking, it's just the outcome of the optimization. Yeah.
There's a technology piece in there, right? There's different gas units that have different conversion rates, and these are peaking facilities meant to run kind of in this state of needing to balance the system versus a baseload unit, which is available 20%.
Okay, we can transition to the second requirement. Next slide. This is somewhat similar to the first requirement, although now we're transitioning from having to maintain reserve margins in our generation supply. We also are mandated to maintain reserve margins on our transmission grid. And the entity that prescribes those reserve margins is called NERC, or North American Electric Reliability Corporation, under the federal government. So the way in which NERC makes sure you follow these grid reserve margin requirements is they perform audits. We heard a little bit of an update on the recent on-site audit we had this summer, but I wanted to point out that the grid planning standards were a huge focus from NERC in the audit this last summer. Sorry, there's a bug flying around. There was a huge focus on the grid planning standards. And we came out of that very good, where their preliminary findings did not identify any issues. They reviewed a ton of our transmission planning system performance studies and looked very closely at our grid expansion plans. And so we came out of that very clean, which I'm very pleased to report on, which is a big deal. Another item I wanted to point out while I'm on this slide just real quickly is in addition to prescribing grid reliability requirements, this NERC entity, they also monitor top risks to grid reliability. They identified two big ones that grid planners really need to pay close attention to. I just want to call them out here. The first one is the changing resource mix and the impacts that's having on the erosion of what I'm going to call essential grid reliability services. The second big grid risk is the ever increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events and how that's pushing the grid to the limits and sometimes beyond limits. Because of those two major risks, NERC is issuing new guidelines and starting to evolve their reliability standards on how to deal with these new risks. And so we're paying very close attention to these changes in the regulatory landscape to make sure we remain compliant going forward. So with that, I think we'll move on to the next requirement. So this is requirement 3, almost halfway through. We're starting to transition from the first two requirements, which were really mandated requirements for grid reliability and generation reliability, to now getting into resiliency planning of the system. And there's a couple points I'm going to make on this particular one. There's a lot of resiliency planning changes going on at SPP, which is the region we're part of, and we're doing a lot of resiliency planning focuses internal to OPPD locally on our generation and transmission and distribution grid. I'm going to start off by talking about what's been going on at SPP over the past year. There's been some pretty significant changes in this resiliency planning space on both the generation supply and the transmission grid. So over the last year, PP has enacted major policy changes on their generation resource adequacy perspective. Talked about the planning reserve margin increases, which were huge, but they've also approved various other policies which basically change the way they count or accredit certain types of generation towards meeting that planning reserve margin to help ensure that the generation shows up when it's needed the most and that we're planning for it that way in a proper manner. SPP's also created a newer fast track generation interconnection study process in an attempt to get new generation on the grid faster for load serving entities because they understand the planning reserve margin requirements are going to be more arduous for utilities to meet. They want to create a better process to get generation from application to energization much sooner. And then the last item I want to talk about is still being debated. It's the demand response policy. So a lot of the current debate is to make some of the requirements more stringent such that many of the demand response today has what I would call some opt-out clauses. And so SPP, the debate is going on if you have certain option-out clauses and you're going to rely on those to meet planning reserve margins, how can we plan the system if customers don't have to show up when their demand response is needed the most? So there's a big debate going on in SPP on how to review and modify that policy. We hope that feathers out by the end of the year or early next year is what we're hearing. I'm going to quickly switch over to some of the changes going on in SPP transmission grid planning. One major thing I wanted to point out is for the first time in SPP, they have developed transmission expansion plans solely based on extreme winter weather analysis. In the past, they've done scenario planning for extreme winter weather and summer weather. This is the first time that said we are going to build transmission around these major winter weather issues. And in their last regional transmission expansion plan, they initiated some major transmission projects in SPP to increase transfer capability across the region to deal with some of the stress we saw during the winter weather events over the past few years, which is a big change from what they've done in the past. I'm going to transition now to the next slide and start focusing more on some resiliency planning OPPD's done on our local generation and transmission and distribution grid. Start off by talking on our generation supply. So I talked a lot about winter weather. OPPD's been doing a ton of stuff when it comes to winter weather readiness and hardening of our existing generation fleet. A lot of component freeze mitigation measures put in place is probably one of the biggest things we've done. We've done heat tracing, insulation, basically you name it, and I think we've done it. In addition, we've done some flood protection mitigation measures, notably at our Nebraska City station for our existing fleet. We're also adding new generation and modernizing our generation fleet. Our new combustion turbines that we're adding, they are able to operate at new extreme high and low temperatures. In addition, these new combustion turbines will be capable of dual fuel operation. So if gas supply is stressed, we will have a backup fuel source at these sites in the form of fuel oil, which will be able to operate on long duration because of the storage tanks we are putting there, which adds a resiliency component for fuel assurance at these sites. You go to the next slide. So some of the resiliency things we're doing on our transmission and distribution grid, I just wanted to highlight real quick. On our transmission grid, we have plans to add over 400 miles of new transmission in the next decade. That is a massive amount for OPPD. That's 4 times more than what we've done in the past 10 to 15 years. We're going to do it in the next 10 years. Huge amount of new transmission, which will be built to modernize standards, modernize capacity, and modernize designs. On our distribution system, I wanted to call out, a couple months ago, I gave an update on something called the Integrated Distribution Plan, which was an effort to modernize our distribution planning and grid modernization efforts. A flagship component of that was our AMI, or Advanced Metering Infrastructure ecosystem, which when that's all said and done over the next three to 4 years, we're going to have way better real-time operation visibility to what's going on out on our distribution system to help us respond to those extreme weather events that roll through our area. So I can give a lot more examples, but I'm just going to kind of pause there and now transition to the 4th requirement.
And real quick, that 400 miles, could you help us understand, help me understand, how much of that is being driven by SPP as an example versus our own, us just making the decision that we need to rebuild or build new? Like, help me understand what that's like.
I would say, so just to kind of explain, like SPP. So we work closely with SPP on our transmission expansion plans, which are focused on serving new load, connecting new generation, mitigating congestion in the market. Of that 400 miles, I would say about 300 miles is anticipated coming from the SPP driven for serving load, supporting generation, mitigating congestion in the market.
Okay.
The remaining maybe 100 miles there is more rebuilding aging infrastructure to modernize standards, as some of our transmission facilities are starting to get aged in condition.
Okay, thank you.
Go to the next slide. So requirement number 4 in this SD is specifically calling for the calculation of a couple resource adequacy metrics that focus on the ability of OPPD's generation to serve OPPD's load. And these metrics are geared towards ignoring any potential support we can get from other generators in SPP. So it's somewhat of a self-sufficiency barometer for our generation to serve our load. And the 2 metrics it calls to be calculated here, one is called a loss of load expectation, which is a frequency calculation for loss of load for your generation not being able to serve your load. And the other metric is called EUE, or expected unserved energy, which is the magnitude of energy you lose during this loss of load event. Last time we calculated, these metrics are shown in the table there. We're in 2023 when we were launching into our near-term generation expansion. And I will just point out, a metric of 100% would represent an absolute perfect system with no loss of load. So you can see what the calculations were in 2023 in the table and how they're supposed to progress way up to the top end of the reliability range by 2030 after we add all of our generation we have planned to add. I'll mention, since the metrics were last calculated in 2023, we've added Turtle Creek Station and Platteview Solar, which has improved those metrics. So we're on our way to getting towards the 99.9%, but we still have a ways to go to add the rest of our near-term generation. We continue to work on those plans. As part of our next integrated resource planning / integrated system planning effort, we will be bringing back new calculations of these metrics when we do that. So part of the next monitoring report next year.
So for these numbers on the projection for 2030 for both frequency and energy, does that assume load growth and that the resources currently approved would achieve those metrics by 2030 with the projected load growth that we saw earlier?
These were based on 2023 calculations, so it would have assumed some load growth, but not to the levels that we're seeing now.
And thank you. Things have changed since 23. When do we update those local projections to help us understand whether or not 99.99% is still right?
So as part of the next integrated system planning effort, resource planning effort in 2026, there's going to be an update to these calculations where you'll get a current state and a future state, which we will update in the monitoring report, which will include updated load forecasts and generation forecasts.
I think,
Sorry, follow up on that. So the next time we'll get a sense for what the 2030 projections are is when we do the IRP.
Yes.
That's not resource plan. What's the new name?
Integrated system plan,
Thank
trying to
you.
match this SD title here.
And remind us of the timing of start and finish for.
That's right. Start scoping later this year, but ultimately towards third or fourth quarter of next year is the culmination anticipating for that.
So about a year from now, we'll have it.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, sir, no, not necessarily. I would just offer to, we'll be back, I think, in front of systems here in the fourth quarter to give an ISP update. But then most of the public facing interaction will be in 2026.
Yeah.
So I just offered as clarity. The numbers on the slide here, they give the impression that they're static. And they're not. And so I think the primary conclusion that folks should make is that we are trying to strengthen the system with resources as you go from 2023 to 2030. As our resource mix changes, we lose a shaft, we have an inverter problem, storage fire, whatever, these things happen. And so the supply will change over time. We'll add supply. The load will also change. So this is something that we sort of perpetually chase. And we kind of take, it's almost like a balance sheet. We just kind of take snapshots, moments in time. And we're trying to strengthen the system as we go, and that will continue.
I assume 100% is kind of not achievable, right?
Yeah, great comment.
So, and I also assume that there's a difference between 99.83 and 99.99 that would be felt by our customers. Can you
Yes.
articulate that a little bit? Because in math terms, those are close numbers.
Yeah. What a great question. So we try and plan the system to 1 day in 10 years of a service interruption. So that's 2.4 hours a year that customers would be out of electricity. That is 0.9997, if I recall. Most people just call it 999 reliability. It's generally the highest form of reliability. So as we move from 9983 to 9997, we're reducing the likelihood of a customer not being served. If we were to go to 9997 to 1, that would induce a conversation sort of around gold plating and an unacceptable cost for very, very little benefit to capture that last piece of a system disruption.
You might
So I
want
hope
to
that
differentiate storms versus system disruption.
Maybe you could help me, sir, if you don't mind.
So you're planning the system to reduce the potential for a blackout. I'll use that.
Sure.
As an example. You're not planning the system to avoid all interruptions from storms or acts of weather and severity. You try to reduce that, but those are two different things. And I think it's not always, if I'm a customer and I'm looking at this 99.9% from home, I'm like, well, I just had an outage this last year that was 3 days. So how does that?
Yeah.
Explain that to me, right? I think it's important for us to be clear.
And what you're referring to is clearly covered under SD4 reliability. That's a distribution, how we maintain our distribution systems, et cetera. And like the great call out where this is the resources, generation resources, make sure that we have that reliability.
Yeah, definitely a bulk electric system conversation for the most part. And then we're always sort of fighting things on the distribution system, rodents, trees, all sorts of things. Thank you for that.
I have another follow-up on this slide. I'm really interested in the second bullet. We're improving from a previously degraded state due to delays in resource additions. To formally improve the completion of OPPD's planned generation additions. So So we're improving the system because we're adding resources, right? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. And then we plan generations down the road, like it's just, we're expecting the quality of the system that's going to continue to improve over time because of those actions that we're taking to add resources. Am I getting that right?
You got it. Yeah.
Okay. That's all I need. I just want to make sure I was reading.
And that statement was more of when this was calculated in 2023. If you put yourself back in that mindset, that's about when we were anticipating the power with purpose units to come online. But through various reasons, there was delays. So like I mentioned earlier, Turtle Creek Station just had a ribbon cutting on that within the last month or so. That is improving those values you see up there. So that's an example of an improvement we're making to them as we add new generation to the system.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Well, and to that point, Standing Bear is also contributing to that now or very soon, even though we don't have a official GIA, right? Anytime we can get a resource online producing energy, regardless of that more interconnection agreement piece, that also helps with these numbers.
Correct.
Soon as that facility becomes operational.
Operational.
Yes.
So we're in the commissioning stage right now.
Correct. Okay, I'm gonna move us out before we get more questions on this one and go to number 5. So in the home stretch, we're in the last 2 requirements. This requirement is pretty straightforward. It says provide the board quarterly updates on new generation plans. We added a standing agenda item to this board all committee each quarter to provide updates on what we titled it new generation and transmission. The snippets below on the graphic here show different slide presentations from those quarterly updates over the last year, demonstrating we complied with that requirement. Go to the next slide. I will hit the last requirement. So this last requirement was a more recent addition into this SD9 a couple of years ago when the board approved the near-term generation resolution to add a significant amount of new generation on our system. About 1,000 megawatts of renewables and about 1,000 megawatts of conventional generations, roughly, which shakes out to be. And this particular table that was inserted into this SD had target contract execution dates for both renewables and conventional generation. Now, without going through a bunch of details, you'll see a lot of green circles on this tracker here. That signifies that we have completed the contract execution of 99% of the near-term generation requirements that were put before us. So it's a big accomplishment. There's one item we did signify that's challenged, and I'll walk through that here shortly to explain that. But overall, marking completion for contracts for most of this new generation. I'm gonna run through this real quickly. On the renewable front, the target was to hit 1,000 megawatts of contracts in the next 5 years through the High Banks Wind Farm, the Milligan Wind Farm, the Pierce Energy Center Solar Farm. We've executed contracts to meet that mark. Going down the next line, energy storage, the target was 125 megawatts of energy storage by 2027. As part of the Pierce Energy Center Solar Farm, it's also going to add 170 megawatt battery, which we contracted with to meet that requirement. Moving on to the conventionals, dual fuel combustion turbines. The target was to have contracts executed this year for 600 megawatts. We've executed contracts for equipment and EPC for the dual fuel combustion turbines at Turtle Creek and Cass County Station before this year. So that is complete. I'm skipping over the demand response one real quick and pointing out on the on-site fuel storage, that was to add 320 megawatts of fuel oil storage at the existing Cass County Station. And we've executed contracts to begin that work as well. So last one, I'll just cover real quick. Demand response, we indicated that one is challenged. As I mentioned earlier, SPP is in the process of reevaluating their policies for what you can account for response toward your planning reserve margin. Because of that uncertainty, we've scaled back some of our demand response programs until we can get certainty on what we should offer our customers for our programs, because we don't want to offer them something and then have to retool it based on policy changes at SPP. So there's a direct correlation there on kind of waiting for this policy to play out, in addition to some of our budget refocus for this year as well. So we feel like the policy should feather out by the end of the year or early next year, which then we can refocus on how we're going to offer these type of programs to our customers.
I think briefly, Director Bogner, if I could just continue your line of questioning with another small answer. The Pierce County resource here, it shows as 100 megawatts. I think we're doing that. Well, I know we're doing that principally just to acknowledge the band was 1,000 to 1,500. But when we go to the next slide, we'll see just how large that facility is. That is a massive solar and storage facility. And I think being able to get that operational in the late 26, 27 timeframe will be a really big system contribution for on-peak energy during those radiant hours and storage when it's non-radiant. And so that'll just be a really big boost to those numbers that we were talking about on the prior slide as well. And it's part of all of the above that has been discussed, I think, locally here as well as national.
So are we only contracted with 100 megawatts of capacity or?
Yeah, we're not, and if it's, and that's why I said that, because I
The
think,
table shows, so the goal was at least 100 megawatts, so we're saying check, but it's more than 100.
Okay.
So we're just showing that we satisfied the table.
20, so we are contracted for the 420.
yes, ma'am, and I think too, again, the aggregation of the numbers there just gets us to 1,000. But if you go to the next slide, we had a request from a board member to kind of profile some of these facilities. You can see just how large that actual asset is if we go to the next.
Yeah, and just for clarity too, that table is basically copied out of the original SD revision, which was done a couple of years ago. So it was like the target was capped, and so I was just copying and pasting literally what's in the SD. But yes, we are going beyond what that table limit said. So this slide right here, and I think this is the second to very last slide in the whole presentation, was to again address, I think, some questions on the renewable aspects of part of the near-term generation contracts. So there's 3 major renewable contracts for facilities here that we've contracted with. And each of these renewable contracts is slightly different than the other. And I wanted to point out those differences. On the Milligan Wind Farm, which is a 300 megawatt wind farm in south central Nebraska, which is currently in operation and energized, we entered into our traditional power purchase agreement, which is for capacity, energy, along with the environmental attributes. On the 2 other renewable facilities on this slide here, these are entered in with a partnership of one of our large retail customers, Google, to help support getting these large renewable facilities in operation. So the High Banks Wind Farm, which is a 600 megawatt wind farm in north central Kansas, we entered into what's known as a capacity only contract, which is slightly different than the last one I talked about with Milligan. In the Pierce Energy Center facility, that's a 420 megawatt solar facility with a 170 megawatt battery facility. That one's currently under construction. And the type of agreement we entered into that was for capacity and partial energy. So again, each of these contracts have a little bit of differences between them, but overall, each one of these facilities is helping meet our resource adequacy requirements, to meet our SPP planning reserve margin requirements to serve OPPD's retail load. But this was in a direct response to some of the questions we had during, I think, systems committee or after system committee. So hopefully that answers the questions, but if there's more, I'll just pause real quick and see.
So this slide was a discussion that I had with Cliff, and there's 3 different attributes that come from the projects: the capacity, the energy, and the RECs. The RECs give claim to the renewable attributes of the projects. And so each of these projects have slightly different agreements on those. The requirement for SD9 specified capacity, not energy, in the way that the policy language is written. And so the presentation on the previous slide highlights capacity from the resources. And I would encourage us to keep that in mind as we do policy updates in the future about what we're specifying related to capacity, energy, and RECs, because those are different attributes. Different projects can have different agreements about who has claim to which portions of that. So the specificity that was provided in the current language in SD9 only indicated capacity. It said megawatts, that means capacity. But the discussion with Cliff, and the reason this slide was included, the next one, is that the RECs are more related to sustainability outcomes. And we have multiple different programs with RECs, including a newly developed program to offer customers to choose to participate and acquire RECs directly for their own energy consumption. And so in the SD7 monitoring report, we anticipate additional discussion about the way that our REC program is attributing the claim to the renewable attributes of various resources, both these and others in our portfolio, so that all of our customers can understand where are they in their claims on the percentage of their energy that comes from emission-free or other sources.
And I would just add the Pierce and Milligan both go into our calculations of carbon intensity, and obviously we don't include high banks because it's merely a capacity. Okay? We'll discuss that in more detail in SD7 next month.
Yeah, so just making sure that everybody's aware, we have 3 different policies that are related here. And we talked a little bit about SD4 covering customer-sided service interruptions related to SD9. And now SD7 is also related to SD9 and specifically related to the environmental aspects of the RECs. So we'll talk about that in the future, but we are aware of that. And that's why it's not covered in additional detail here, because the policy language doesn't specify anything related to RECs or the environmental attributes of the resources in SD9.
And that's a great point, and it just shows the dynamic between all SDs and how they all relate to each other, and how we've tried to do a good job at compartmentalizing if that's possible, like the different topics. These, if you remember, the SD9 before it was labeled integrated system planning, it was resource adequacy. So the focus here, and before that it was resource planning. So the focus here was really capacity. Do we have the right capacity? And that's the focus here. And I really appreciate Director Williams' call out to say there's more to these resources than just capacity. So what else are we getting from them? And it's the energy piece and it's RECs. So, and they will belong in different buckets, but they all kind of work together. That's a great call.
Okay, I think there's one more slide.
Actually, could we go back one more? Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think I'm reflecting on when we, to your point, Dr. Williams, when we talked about this table, and I remember us having conversations around like, what does it mean for it to be contracted? And I just want to make sure that we understand and point out that a lot of these are complete, which is to say the contracts are in place, right? But the projects are not done.
Correct.
Right, in the same way that Turtle Creek and Standing Bear have taken years past when we thought we would have them. The resources are not online. They're under construction, so on and so forth, right? So with one exception, I think, which one's online already?
High Banks and Milligan.
High Banks and Milligan, so there's 2.
So I want to make sure that that's really vivid for us because we're talking about resource adequacy, right? So contracts, yes. Electrons are not flowing in all cases.
I really appreciate the wisdom of the statement because saying it that way more properly characterizes the risks that we continue to have.
Yeah,
and unless we say it that way, we don't get that. And so thank you for that.
Maybe the year that Pierce is expected.
Late 26 or early 27. They have a range where they can contractually, there's like an early date and late date.
Okay, now I'll move us to the last slide. So it just ends with the recommendation that says that this will be a voting item, obviously at the Thursday meeting, but recommends to find us sufficiently in compliance with board policy SD9.
So I do have another point of clarification. If we can go back a couple slides to the volume by date, the green circles. Reading the policy language, we talked about 1,000 megawatts was the lower end of the range on the renewables, and that's been achieved. We talked about the dual fuel combustion turbines and the range 600 to 950 and achieved so far, I believe it's 900 is the number there. So the upper end of the range on the gas combustion turbines. So with regards to the renewable projects, we talked earlier about the quarterly updates on the status for different projects. And looking back at previous quarterly reports from October and January and April, each of those quarterly reports included a pie chart that showed a breakdown of the projects that have been contracted, High Banks, Milligan, and Pierce, and another wedge listed as remaining renewables. So at each of the preceding 3 quarterly reports, we indicated we anticipated additional renewable procurement to be coming in the future. But now that we've come to the monitoring report, we do not reflect any additional renewable procurement to be anticipated moving forward according to the policy language. So can someone clarify whether or not we are completed with this and we do not anticipate additional renewable procurement or where we are projected looking forward?
There may be other thoughts. I would just offer to the table here is just the format that we pulled from the SD. So we're just trying to consistently monitor it. if I recall your statements correctly, I believe we showed the full band in the pie chart. And we were simply identifying that I think there was plus or minus 150 megawatts of headroom. That's in that monitoring in those quarterly reports. And so we continue to have conversations with suppliers on the attributes of their projects and if they're ready to go. We also are navigating the timing of load and interconnection and other bulk electric system projects that can affect those other supply projects. I think we'll continue to do that for some time, but as a general answer, we are out and about and trying to drum up more resources.
And if I may, I think this is a very important piece. If you'll remember, this table was created back in 2023. In conjunction with the approval of the new near-term generation resources, this is the revision happened at the same time. Well, things have changed. We are now 2 years later, still looking at satisfying what the board has to satisfy, which is very important. But 2 years later, we find ourselves with a need for significantly more capacity. And I think to your point, it's how actively are we tracking and measuring the additional capacity and energy that our system continues to have to work. You mentioned renewables, but it's the same thing with existing units, with new other type of generation. And I think that part of that will be informed to us by the integrated system plan at the end of the next year. What I sense from your question is, well, do we have to wait until then, or are there opportunities before then, where if we know the capacity shortage will exist, it exists today. Right? If that's likely going to exist by the time the integrated system plan comes out, it behooves us not to at least consider what could we start procuring today in anticipation of that report. And again, it goes beyond renewables, including renewables for sure, but I think it talks to the very complicated job that our integrated systems plan team has. Just you have to run studies, but at the same time you have to meet reality and how fast can you secure these resources whenever they become available.
So I guess I'm gonna reframe my question then. Are we completed with purchasing new renewable assets?
Based on these, yes.
So directors, I guess I would advise us that when we write policy language in the future, ranges are not a good idea. We provided a range. We've received quarterly updates that indicated that we were aiming for the top end of that range. There were repeated public presentations that we were striving toward 1,500 megawatts of renewable capacity. And at the time of accountability, when the monitoring report is presented, we are now told that 1,000 megawatts is 99.9% completed, and we should recommend sufficiently compliant, and that we should not anticipate additional renewable generation. I think this was insufficient policy guidance provided by the board because we seem to be getting different outcomes than were previously presented or than what we would have expected. And I have many other comments on that.
Well, so I'm trying to understand. So appreciate that comment. And maybe some of this is in the way in which we're reporting this, but when I look at we're bouncing around slides all over the place. The next slide, if I total up 600 plus 420 plus 300, I get to 1320. Right. So we're towards the top end of the range of 1,000, 1,500. Am I right?
Yep. And that's what was presented in the quarterly reports and the pie charts, including the remaining 180 would go to 1,500 in each of the preceding 3 quarters.
So I think, yeah, I mean, fair enough. I think, the visibility for me would be, and this is like a note, the discussion for me is helping me understand the previous table a little bit. But I think to your point, for me, the question that gets raised is like, we as a board, through the near-term generation 23, were asked to give approval to go out and buy a lot of stuff and to build a lot of stuff, right? And so I think for me, the question then remains, or the question I think that you asked, which I think you said was, are we done? Or do we need to go back out? I mean, maybe this is not my report, maybe it's a different discussion, right? But like, I'm curious about like what the go forward play is here. If we've essentially satisfied the contractual obligation that we have for what's in the table.
That makes
Thank
sense.
you. And if I may, based on the table, we've satisfied the table, and I fully appreciate the ranges, and if you look at the table, sorry, Aaron. We've satisfied all the capacity requirements that we projected, the minimum band of capacity requirements we projected through 2030. I think that's the issue here is we could procure more renewable generation based on that band. It's 2025. Procuring that additional capacity today, it has pros and cons, right? You could get that project for potentially a lower price, but we may not need it until 2030. And so the issue here is considering the need and the timing and how much our customer owners would carry that extra cost before it's consumed by additional capacity. So I think if I could rephrase my answer is we're never done. I don't think we will be done ever looking and procuring resources. However, based on the requirements of this table, I would say we're complete. But we have teams that are constantly working and talking to developers that were considering these resources. You and I have had conversations about, hey, what other projects are out there that we could get on now, and what advantages versus disadvantages would we have if we get onto that? Those conversations are alive and well. So hopefully that helps.
Director Williams, I perceived your comment to be largely towards your colleagues on the board. Would it be okay if I added a perspective? Right? Back in 2023, we didn't know the PRM. We didn't know the accreditation. We didn't know other things. We spent a lot of time with the board talking about the unknowns, the known unknowns. And we asked for permission to meet for the community. And that's what we tried to do. That's what we've been reporting against. So sometimes it's hard for me to remember last week, let alone 3 years ago or however long a time it's been. Well, I just offered that for the context of that situation.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarity on the changing situations, PRM, ELCC, all of them.
Thank you.
If I may just say, this looks like this is a monitoring report. This is when its time has come up in the year. So they're reporting on what has been achieved, and then make a new one, and we'll go on from there. And I did not discern anywhere that we're done procuring electrons of any kind. So I'm supportive of this recommendation.
Any other directors' comments? Okay. I guess hearing none. There's the final slide. Any reflections on policy, where we are now, strategic implications, look forward?
Well, I think there have been some comments on strategic implications, but this is a pretty huge lift for this organization. And it has spanned all types of generation, dual fuel, on-site storage, energy storage. It's just been pretty vast and wide, while we've been doing, Turtle Creek and Standing Bear Lake at the same time. So I think the community here, the utility, should celebrate that this much has been accomplished. And I really commend you for holding off on demand response a little bit. I think everybody's interested in that, but it's like planning before you know all the rules wastes your planning time. And it's just easier and more efficient to wait until you know what the ground rules are. I love that little chart earlier in here that shows, let's see, this is where OPPD sits in this nest of 5 entities. We are not at the top. We're at the bottom. So I think it really, the district has done a great job of being as efficient as they can. So, Andrew, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add that, like, we put a timeline in place back in 23 and I mean, a lot of it's ahead of schedule, right? So like, let's acknowledge that a heck of a lot has happened, really, really quick. For that, I'm extraordinarily grateful. I also want to just acknowledge like the scratchiness of the conversations we're having as a district and as a SPP and as a country about resource adequacy. And like the juxtaposition of those conversations versus this monitor report, I think are pretty stark. Like this monitor report reflects that we've done a lot of really good things really quickly. And yet there's huge challenges on the horizon. So I feel like I'm kind of jumping over a fence a little bit as we have some of these conversations, and I just want to.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And then for demand response, I feel the slide maybe discredits what you guys are doing in that area. It reads like it's totally on pause. I would, I guess, ask for you guys to affirm that you're still working towards goals that are driven by demand response. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, we're still doing work in that regard. We're evaluating the programs that are most likely or clearly affected by the shifting SPP policy, and those are the ones that we're pausing on. We've got others that we're continuing to move forward within the financial constraints. We're certainly continuing to try to drive energy efficiency in demand side management, including demand response programs. What we'll do as SPP policy on accreditation becomes clear, that it will zero in on which of those customer products and services are most advantageous. And then that'll give us the ability to look at the available resources and focus those accordingly.
Yeah, thank you. And then in the same category, was there, when the resolution that grouped a lot of this near-term generation was approved, did demand response have a year associated with it? I just wanted to ask about everything else having a year.
Great question. I'd have to dig out the board resolution. For some reason, I remember 10-year horizon.
Okay,
when it was issued, but I'd have to look it up.
So still to Director Rudy's point, the schedule of work. So thank you.
I'll just reflect and acknowledge that I think when we wrote this, the renewable piece in particular, we were thinking it was contracted to own or contracted PPAs, and the district's done a really good job about being creative in this space and looking for other ways to accomplish this. And I think that's commendable. I think that I think that there needs to be a mix of that, right? And so for us to, have a capacity relationship with the Google assets is one way, but I would encourage us to still diversify in that in the way we approach any of our resources. So, yeah, thank you for taking a creative solution, making it work.
For me, we have 15 strategic directives, right? And we're trying to manage the districts on all 15 aspects of our operations. Undoubtedly, that's how we monitor and present. From my vantage point, and I've said this before to the company, resource adequacy is a challenge in our generation. No pun intended. The concept of abundant, available, reliable, affordable, environmentally sensitive generation becomes super important. But as a country is experiencing this massive electrification driven by digitization of our economy and data centers and manufacturing, when you're seeing different reports that are projecting our load to double or triple in the next 10 years. This topic, this SD becomes, in my mind, one of the most important, if not the most important one for us to achieve. Just because it takes such a long time for these assets to come online. And unless we have available resources, we cannot even begin to talk about how reliable they are, how affordable they are, or how environmental sensitive they are. So I love the conversation, and I just wanted to offer those reflections today. The previous conversation we had is this table enough? No. Right now, we're working with that table because that's a framework we have from previous set of decisions we had for the new generation. I fully expect these SD to continue to evolve as we continue to look at adding more generation. And I am encouraged by this conversation because I know the board is paying attention, and the board will set the bar high in order for us to have that abundant and available resource that is driven by the system. So thank you for the conversation, because to me this is a very, very important essay.
I have some comments about the ranges that were used in the policy. And so I guess looking forward, I think we should be more specific in the way that we write policy as to what we should expect from the resources that are procured in regards to approvals that are given, both related to megawatts of capacity, megawatt hours of energy, and the way RECs are attributed. And we've used ranges, and I would recommend that we are more clear on the expectations so that at the end of the monitoring report, we do not end with a position of uncertainty about whether or not we have achieved what was specified in the policy. And I hope we'll consider that as we look at a future SD9 update. Any additional comments on this one? Great. That's the end of that agenda item. I guess back to you for the next item, new format. So
I think so. I appreciate working through the new format. So Ms. Purnell, we'll go to you for the ethics and monitoring report, please.
Yes, Susan Gunderson, she's one of the leaders in our labor relations group. She will make her way to the front as she gives that report.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about ethics, everyone's favorite subject. Really, ethics is a foundation of how we do business, how we define our interactions. And really, when we go through this report, I would like you to think about what we do. Ethics is our foundation, and then we have framework. We have framework for our board of directors, and we have frameworks for our employees. So as we go through and talk about it today, we're going to kind of divide it up into those two different groups, but keep in mind, truly, all of us in this room, all of our employees, really, this is how we do our business, and this is how we interact with each other. So when we look at ethics, there's a couple of things that we look at in our bullet points. Is that we want to ensure that we maintain ethical standards in how we do our business and how we interact. We do those clear rules through our framework and our guidelines. We require disclosure for conflict of interest. We need to know if there's a conflict of interest in what you do, maybe outside of OPPD, as to how you conduct your business here at OPPD. And most importantly, and what we're really going to talk about today, is the process for assurance from the board that we are maintaining the integrity in how we do our business. So through that, we have identified that we do a very robust reporting of violations of the code and or policies, or potentially even the law, how we do our investigations to ensure that as we get those violations, that they are of merit and that we are taking the appropriate action related to what those allegations may be. And more importantly, that not only are we addressing those allegations as they happen, but also protecting OPPD and how we deal with those violations if there are any. And then honestly, the last one, and that's why we are here today, is to really go over that annual report for that insurance that we are doing the things that we agreed to do. So with that, on our next slide, this is really high level. There's lots of stuff on here, but keep in mind the board kind of has their own set of things, and that is actually identified within the SD10. From an employee perspective, we actually do that through company policy, and that is with our employee code of ethics and business conduct. So as we're going and we get our allegations, we really use that as our guide to determine what actions are in violation of that. So that is really the expectations for everybody, whether you're an employer or board directors, you kind of follow these rules outlined here. And on the next slide, this slide is perfect. You already heard earlier today that we did not find any allegations, or there were no allegations related to board of directors on the ethics. When we look at the employee side, over the last year, we had 37 reports that had been reported of a perceived concern or a violation. 36 of those have been investigated. One is still pending. It was still open at the time that we prepared this. So of those 36 violations, we actually had 10 where we did find a violation of a policy. What we have done from our standpoint then is that based on the violation, we took appropriate action and remediated what that may have been based on the allegation itself. So on the next slide, this is just a summary. What we have done is we have really looked at, when you think about ethics, you can't really just look at 1 year at a time. You really want to look at, we decided 5 years. We wanted to look at 5 years from a trending perspective, because 1 year of data doesn't really give you the ability to say, is this an off year? Is this not an off year? We wanted to give that perspective. We did 5 years because we felt like that gives us a nice range of a nice range. So when we look at this, back in 2024, we did change our philosophy. Right now, an employee can, or anybody from the public, they can actually send in a ethics point, which is our third party where we track our things. Additionally, employees or the public can send comments to you as board members, just to our vice presidents. They can call a number and say, we have an employee who may be driving erratically. We tried to start capturing some of those that are coming in outside of ethics point and ethics point as a way to maintain how we're getting all of that data, because we do have lots of avenues for customers or employees to let us know that there are some concerns, but we really previously had only been tracking them if they actually went in from the ethics point. So we are trying to capture all of those other pieces as that data comes to us, so we can look and see what those trends may be. So last year was really that first year that we did a lot more robustness when we think about what those allegations may be. So we have our 24 numbers, we have our 25 numbers. And again, what the slide is really showing is what was substantiated and what was unsubstantiated. And generally, notwithstanding, if you look at 24, about 25%-ish. I am from human capital, so we get to say ish when we look at percentages. But generally, about a quarter of what comes in, there is some type of remediation that is required from those allegations. So our next slide is just really, this is kind of an overall. When we have ethics point, there's 4 general categories that a person can identify what they want to make their allegation on. And within those 4 general categories, there's 39 different subcategories that they can identify where their concerns are at. So over the last 5 years, here's a kind of a bar chart of where our allegations have been. The next couple of slides, we actually do have kind of a more of a in-depth as to where those numbers came from and what those years are. We're going to show the data in a couple of different ways. Some of you may be more visual, so you might appreciate the graphical aspect of it, and some of you may be more data driven and you want to see the actual numbers. So if we can go to the next slide, what this is showing you again is those allegations that have come through by category and what they look like by year. So that top line is over the last 5 years, and then we have it broken out by year. Again, remember 24 and 25, we're adding extra things other than just straight ethic points. And so as you see, I mean, they do kind of look pretty similar in regards to that. When we look at our numbers, our big 3 numbers really are, we have discrimination is generally one of our main ones that come in. Other is kind of a unique category. An allegation can come in and they might not know where to go, so they just put other, or sometimes it's other because they would just want to share a thought or a feeling. And then the last one is, I believe, it's the improper management. So this is an avenue. These are kind of our top 3. So if we go to our next slide, this is really where the numbers are per year. And when we go from our perspective from labor relations, is that we want to ensure that we're not seeing a trend from year to year to year. if we do start seeing a trend, we want to go in and dive into that. So if you look at the numbers for, again, I apologize, we wanted to share a lot of data, so maybe you have to look with a magnifying glass, but if you look at the numbers for 2025 compared to 2024, our discrimination claims went from 6 to 11. Generally, we see it's usually a one-off, 1 or 2 from year to year. This last year, that number was a little bit higher than what we normally see. And I wanted to give you some perspective as to why that number looks so much bigger than all the other kind of progression between year to year to year. So in 2025, one of the claims that came in 2025 was actually a repeat of a claim that we received in 2024. So sometimes we will get multiple allegations around an incident, and that's what happened. One of those claims of that 11 was something that was reported in 2024. It was repeated again in 2025. So we previously investigated it, but it does count in that number. Additionally, we actually received 4 reports related to an incident. 3 of them came underneath the discrimination title. So it was one incident, but it came in as 3 separate reports under discrimination. So that inflates that number a little bit as well. And then the last part of that 11 is we had 2 allegations that came in related to a process adherence. So although they were separate, it was still related to the same process. So those numbers, although they look higher than what you would expect because they are at 11, there is some reasoning behind that, is that you do have multiple duplicate allegations that come in there. So to be true to our numbers, we did get 11, but of the 11, a handful of them really were the same instance or the same violation. So from a trend perspective, we do see that we are maintaining it. We don't see anything that we're going off the chart on. And the ones that we do have kind of that elevated number, we can logically explain why those are, because they go back to 1 or 2 instances rather than 11 separate instances.
From an individual report, is that from like different employees reporting about the same incident? And so it eventually gets investigated as?
We investigate everything that comes in. That's a great question. Where we struggle with Ethics Point, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. What happens sometimes is a lot of things will come in anonymously. So when an investigation comes in, it comes in anonymously. So the one investigation where I shared that we had 4 different ones, they were all anonymous. So it could have been one person doing it 4 times, or it could have been 4 separate people doing it. We don't know whether something comes in from an anonymous perspective or not. We investigate it, we do our due diligence. When it's anonymous, it is a little bit harder for us because we do try to engage in, like, we need more information because sometimes we'll just get something. So the anonymous piece makes it a little bit more difficult, but to your question, we don't know if somebody has done it 4 or 5 times or 1 time, or if it's 4 or 5 different people.
And what's the category inquiry? What does that?
That is used when an employee may have a question related to a policy or a procedure or an action by management. They're really just asking for clarity. It's kind of a weird category, I will share, because truly an inquiry, you would think that that would be a question that you would want to ask your peer, your supervisor, your manager, or somebody from human capital. So it's kind of a weird, it's just really more like, hey, I saw you do this. Why? Or this seems weird.
So I appreciate you showing us what categories they belong in, but you said there was 10 that were substantiated. And, I know when allegations are made, obviously some are substantiated, some are valid, put in but aren't substantiated, but the individual had a reasonable perspective, and sometimes they're just fallacious. But of the 10 that were substantiated, you don't show us what those were in or categories.
Right,
Is there a
and-
reason for that?
Yes, there is a reason for that, because when we do an investigation, we want to maintain the investigations and the results of that investigation. So we do, the reason why we do that is because, one, we want to protect the company in regards to, we don't necessarily want to go out and say, for example, Susie Gunderson was caught speeding and doing things she shouldn't have been doing, and this is the discipline that she got, because that's not something we would want to share. So we do that to maintain the integrity of that piece. And the other part of it is the trust that we have with our employees. If we have an employee who participates in that investigation process or who has identified an action, we don't want to create a situation where there could be potential retaliation. And so we do want to maintain that kind of need to know what that looks like. So we, one, can maintain the trust of our employees for them to come and actually share information with us without fearing like they're going to be retaliated. And that's why we keep this at a very high level, especially in the nature of this. We're standing at committee. There could be people watching that. We want to ensure that we are not putting OPPD in a position where an employee can come back and later say, I filed a report, you talked about it in the public, and now they could potentially have a retaliation claim against us. So it is, we do that in a way to maintain the integrity, but also to mitigate our risk in the future so there's not a retaliation allegation.
Susie, perhaps maybe just adding to where you were going, how do you share that information? Of course, in private, for the reasons you talked about. How do you share that with Mikhail, with myself, perhaps with the risk committee? What's the process for having that information sharing that doesn't compromise the privacy of individuals?
Thank you. Let me free. So what we do when we do an investigation, we share a high level summary of what happened and what our recommendations are related to if there should be discipline, if there should be policy changes, if there should be additional training. So we keep the investigation in itself very, very restricted, and it's just really more the summary aspect of the high levels of employee X may have violated this policy, didn't violate this policy.
I guess I'm less concerned with knowing the specific instances, but more if 5 of those 10 substantiated ones were within a certain category, then that maybe shows there's a systemic issue that I should be aware of as the board. If there's one here, one there, one, I'm less concerned from a systemic problem perspective. I mean, any ethics violations, I don't want to dismiss it from there, but there's less for me as a board member to engage on. If there's, onesie twosies in different places, then the policies are working, presumably, because they're addressing that issue. If there's a trend within certain categories, then maybe we need to look at what the policy is or the training is that's enabling that trend to continue in a certain area.
And I have to apologize, we do actually, I appreciate that if we do that part of that trend piece is really what we do in that recommendation. So if we are seeing a trend in employees who are speeding, then that would be, we need to go back and reinforce the expectations related to, from the safety standpoint, we would talk to Gina and her folks and saying, hey, we've gotten 15 reports based on driving. We would go back. That would be part of our investigations. That would be part of our recommendations as to what those next steps are. Truly, when we are doing an investigation, it's very unique in how we do it because we have to address the actual situation that it happened. Say it's an exchange between 2 employees. We mitigate that, but then we step back and exactly to your point, Director, is really what could we have done to position either one of these employees in a better situation, and what are those next steps? We go back every year. We look at our ethics policy and we ensure that our ethics policy is capturing stuff that we need to do. We do training every year with our employees related to ethics training. And what we do as part of that, as we're getting ready to that training, we go back and we look at, okay, what disciplines have been driven from our code of ethics policy, and how do we take that and incorporate it into our training for the upcoming year? So for example, this year, what we have done is there's some additional things that we've done kind of related to, well, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to get into in-depth details, but we've taken that information and then we've gone and we stepped back from that robust corporate protect OPPD level is how do we ensure our employees know what's expected of them and update our training accordingly. It's not probably the exact answer you're looking for, but we do part of that. I just probably did not articulate it as well as I could have.
Hey, if I could offer, I think this is a great opportunity for refinement of the report. I hadn't gotten your question at first, but now that you explain it again, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's just, here's the numbers and give it to us in closed session or what categories they're in. I'm not asking for the specifics on instance. I just, be interested in those 10 things. Are they in a range of different categories or are they all speeding? Right? Is that?
They vary, I can tell you that.
Yes, and so that's all I'm saying. The category type is what I'd be interested in here, and I'm expecting, the leadership team to adjudicate the appropriate training and measures to handle the situation or discipline actions if relevant. So I don't want to get involved with that part of it, but I'd like to see if there's trends that we should be aware of.
Yeah, I agree with that.
In an organization of 2,000 employees, 10 sustained, not
Yeah.
well-substantiated complaints does not seem like a whole lot.
It's a pretty small
Yeah,
number.
unless there's a bunch of egregious ones.
Yeah.
No.
And that is the thing. I mean, in all actuality, I mean, we could have a violation apology of a policy, and it could just be it could be very simple or it could be very egregious. Generally, ours are on the low side. We don't necessarily see a lot of the egregiousness, but that is something when I don't want to jump the gun, but I know that we'll have a reflection piece based on this conversation. What other things do you have to ask of Mikkel and I, or are there other things that you think that would be beneficial when we prepare the report in 2026?
So, following on the idea of breakdown by category and trends and year over year, is it possible to compare ourselves to other organizations? Find out, is this out of 2,000? Is 10 substantiated over the course of a year? 2,000 places that one?
I'm not sure. We can certainly investigate that. That is something that we can look at. We'll have to look with Ethics Point to see what that capability is.
Yeah, great. And it's not understandable, but it just seems like that's a thing we do with other metrics we use is to determine
Right.
how we rank ourselves against ourselves over time and against others.
Right. Especially when you look at ST8 and we look at best places to work where we have that outside aspect of it. This is kind of a more higher area, but that is something that we can definitely explore for 2026. Okay, well, with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to have this very robust discussion. So we are asking that the board does accept the risk related to ST10.
Questions that on what's been accomplished, challenges, or strategic implications that we should talk about. Javier, I'd invite you to provide your perspective as well. Go ahead. Yeah, no one else is jumping in.
Again, I just talked about the importance of all these. This is, again, just as important as any other. And while we may not have all the benchmark, I think with the comments that we got today are super productive. I think we can get a lot more information. There was a comment made about, hey, it's only 10 out of 2,200 employees. And while that is true, I think that the bar has to be at 0, right? And then that's what we're acknowledging, that psychological safety is important, and we want a healthy pipeline of ethics points tells me that the organization is healthy. Right? However, having too many substantiated cases tells me that we need to take action. Right. And I think I feel comfortable enough knowing enough about these cases that there is no single area where those substantiated cases are accumulating. But I think to your point, Director Hudson, I think we could do much better in showing that additional lens, that result of how many substantiated per category. I remain incredibly impressed by the workforce here, the level of professionalism and ethics, ethical behavior that we see is really inspiring. And part of it, I think, is part of the mission that we serve. Well, people join to work OPPD not just because it's a job, but because they believe in work. And so I think what you see here reflected is that same passion to serve, but we need to keep that on check. And I really appreciate that. I don't have any other suggestions for the SD other than maybe changing the monitoring report and seeing if there are any ways to benchmark these. But thank you for the opportunity.
I think it's fantastic that we offer Ethics Point as an anonymous source for employees and the public to report out on. I know that we employ many professional engineers, and our State Board of Professional Engineers also adjudicates ethics violations. And so I would encourage us to also think about adding, I'll say, a confirmation that no ethics violation from an engineering standpoint was brought forward to the state board. I think that's public information that could be added to this and provide, I would say, further value to ensure that we're also meeting ethics standards that are outside our walls that our employees are obligated to follow.
It's interesting. Which has me thinking, does this relate to contractors that we work with? Right, we have a line, is this firmly the boundary around the organization, and is there any spillover into all the other stakeholders we work with?
Truly, the expectation is if somebody is on OPPD's property, they would follow OPPD policies and procedures. So whether you're a contractor or not, we would expect that you would come in and abide by the code of conduct. How we adjudicate if they don't is very much different than not.
But so some of these ethic points, contacts, maybe are to a contractor.
Sure.
Yes.
So I think that's it. The point. Yeah, they're part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
We actually get we get some ethic points contacts, and board members, you're probably aware of some of these because they happened recently about our employees at home in their personal lives, right? Sometimes we get those, and so we also have to. We are aware of that, and there are many times when we say, well, there's not a lot we can do on certain personal things, but we get those two, not just on our property, not just on our time, but sometimes it's on employees' time on the weekend at their home.
Oh, I'll just make a note. I was noticing here unsafe working conditions, 1 complaint, and substance abuse, fitness for duty, 1 complaint. I attended a safety presentation earlier in the year, which OPPD leaders were lauded. But I sat in a table with a gentleman who works, I think, in an iron making facility in somewhere in northeast Nebraska here. And there people have to log in. When they log in, they have to solve a puzzle to see if they're thinking well.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if they fail the first time, they sit down for 5 minutes and then they have another chance. And if they fail the second time, they sit down for 10 minutes. And if they fail a third time, somebody comes and says, "How you doing? Do you need to go home today?" Kind of thing. And to have, not have that reflected here, that's just pretty terrific in an industry which is so focused on safety.
Yeah, well, and honestly, Gina, I'm really sorry, but I think that goes back to the policies and the procedures and the trust that we've built in our organization and our safety division business unit. They go out and they ensure that, and we give the tools to our employees to stop work or to do something. So when you look at, if you have a concern and you put unsafe working condition, it really has to be pretty egregious to get to that point because we have practices, procedures, and protocols in place.
Thanks.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate you. I appreciate you giving us time today to talk about ethics, and we will take the information back accordingly. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to pass it over to Mr. McAreevy for customer experience and engagement approach.
All right, thank you, Chair Core. I'm going to invite forward Since he's already there. Matt Barnebeck, our Director of Customer Experience and Operations. Our desire today is to do a couple of things simultaneously. One, educate and fill in maybe some blanks on some really important work we've done about estimated time of restoration. And in so doing, we also want to affirm the role that customer experience as a discipline plays in making advancements for our customers. So Matt, over to you.
All right, I'm in a bad spot here. I'm at the end right before lunch for all of you. I'm squished in between there, and we're late night. So I'm gonna do my best. Make this engaging and fresh. All right, here we go. Let's dive into it. Okay, so we've been on a journey around customer experience for quite some time. Of course, that's a maturity step as you get to customer engagement, right? So that's why you see this synonymous of the title there. So we're working towards that. I'm going to give kind of a brief overview. We've been at this. We've had a team for this about 7 or so years, focused on this as an organization. So I'm going to do kind of a refresher on that. Then I'm going to try to make it real by going through an example on the estimated time of restoration. So let's go ahead. Next. All right. So just a couple key things here. When we talk about customer experience or CX, you're going to see that throughout the slides here today. We talk about this at like an organizational level, right? It's not just purely the teams that work on this. This is a behavior and a methodology at like an organizational level. You see a couple things here. Accelerate, right? So customers' experiences and their beliefs and their behaviors, they change quickly. So we have to change quickly as well to meet that. The seamless is also a very intentional word that's picked here. We aim for frictionless engagements with customers. And we typically look at that, what we would call our core 4. When we look at that, we look at core 4, which is outage. We think about billing and payment, product and services, and then AMI or like the digital engagement, right? So we watch these core 4 journeys throughout time, right, to understand what kind of work effort we need to do. So very, very important. Lastly, we do that through data insights. So we look not only internally, but also externally, what's going on in our space? What do we need to do better? We do journey designs. Journey design, very purely the definition of that would be looking at a process a customer has to go through their lens. So if a customer is going to sign up for service with us, how does that feel? What does that process look like? Where's the friction in that? And then lastly, again, we monitor and measure these things as we go through time. Move on to the next slide. I want to bring us back because last time you probably saw or heard from me, I was talking about SD5 and customer satisfaction. And you'll find as you focus on customer experience, you have better scores in SD5 kind of in general. So studies have found that when you focus on customer experience as a practice that the whole organization takes, usually you see adoption and customer satisfaction scores raised by 20 or 30%. And we've actually seen that. In one measure we'll talk about later, we saw about a 10% to 15% bump in communication since we made a recent change in estimated time of restoration. It's pretty impactful. The other thing to note here is that customer experience isn't just like a feel-good type of initiative, though it can be felt like that. It's really a strategic lever, right? Like the organization has to embody it and take it on. And when you see when a company takes that on, not only as like a practice and a team, but also a discipline across the organization, generally you see measurements and satisfaction go up. You see higher loyalty or what we would consider brand trust, and then growth goes up. You see that on the product side, scoring, things like that. So simply put, if you focus on CX at an organizational level, you'll see better scores kind of across the totality of work. Okay, let's move on. All right, estimated time of restoration. This is one of our core 4s, and also we're very aware that when a customer loses power, that's a very impactful journey for them, right? If you would listen into a call that we would get on an outage from one of our contact center reps, the customer asks the question 3 different times, probably when's my power, when's my power, when's my power gonna be back on, right? Like that's what they want to know. So I thought it'd be really helpful as we dive into ETRs, how do we get through this? So first we're starting here with some industry insights. So I talked earlier about like, how do we pull in some data sources and learn? These are based on not only JD Power, but also Escalent data. So starting at the top, the 5 points of ETR information, 27% bump in satisfaction. Little sneak preview to the next time you'll see me next month, our new outage map that's live.
That's 5 points of information, kind of neat. In 2022, 18%, or since 2022, 18% of utilities have moved towards like these proactive communications. So as a whole, the industry is trying to move, and you're going to see that in our story around ETRs. Satisfaction jumps to when they're communicating. So across the kind of utility spectrum, you have some utilities who don't say anything. You have some who do some intermediate, you know, once we kind of got our whole pulse around when folks will be back on, and you see people doing kind of intentional things, even when all the data and kind of methodology hasn't been all rang out yet. And then lastly, you see satisfaction drop by 28% when the restoration is after an ETR has been communicated. So what that means is, like, in the real world practicality of it, you tell a customer they're going to be on by 1 o'clock. If you restore them at 3, you're going to see a big drop. So trying to set your ETR windows according to that customer behaviors is super duper important. Let's move on. Now, before I jump into kind of the evolution of ETRs, I think this is a really good point for me to stop and highlight a few folks. So members from Troy's team and Brad's team, and of course Tim's team as well, and some that are sitting here in the room, Kate, Aaron, Chris Anglin, others, they've been instrumental in about getting this going. So though I get the pleasure of standing up here and talking about this example and excited about what we've done, it's all actually the folks behind me who have really brought this thing to life. So I'm starting in 2023, and I kind of see that as a watershed. So before 2023, if we got into a storm environment, generally what there's exceptions to this, but generally what you would see is ETRs, especially at like a global state, were released when we had a lot of data and we were kind of towards the end of the storm, right? And generally how that would show up for you is you'd see it on the news, right? You'd see the OPPD expects for all their outages to be back on by X date, right? That's generally how it would be seen. And I should also quickly define global ETR in the sense that we're talking about here. The way we define it internally is 95% of customers who are experiencing an outage due to a storm event will be back on by that time. So that's helpful context. Now, jumping over to the right-hand side of the screen, since 2023, we've done a few different things that's pretty exciting. One, we have an ETR coordinator role based within our storm team. So a storm gets declared, this individual comes to our kind of storm control, and they start thinking through and working with our operations team, our public affairs, our customer service, what could be the ETR, the global ETR at that point? How quickly can we release that? And Aaron Smith, who's in the room here, he fills that role for us today, and he does an absolute wonderful job. Now, we also co-locate those other functions too within that storm room. That's a new change. Historically, we would be remote or we wouldn't be as deeply involved. Now we're there in the storm room working very closely with these teams, making sure that we get not only this global ETR defined, but we get it out. And what that looks like for us, and maybe some of you experience this, those are auto calls today, and they're very directly tied to a customer's outage, very targeted. So before we had this kind of broad sweeping ETR that was released late, now we do very targeted ETR calls directly to customers. That's really, really important and impactful. And they usually, and we've been very intentional about the amount of information within those calls. So again, going back to that JD Power reference of 5 key pieces of information, bump satisfaction, we try to do that as well. So, okay, let's move on to the next slide. So again, like, well, how are we actually doing? So I wanted to kind of highlight a couple stats and then also some interviews we did around this. So starting on the stat side, 97% of the time when we release global ETR, we're correct, which is pretty darn good. I mean, these are very, very difficult things for us to analyze and set, and we set them very quickly. Some within hours of the storm being declared, the teams come. We have full eyesight on all the damage, but we're trying to get intentionally some communications out to our customers so they can plan. Again, going back to understanding how impactful this is, the customer needs to know, am I going to be out overnight and I need to go to a hotel room or not? Like, so we're trying to set that as early and often as we can. Now, the other interesting thing on the data side, and if you're a data nerd like I am, you like to look at this stuff, but you see this interesting trend where very high on the ETRs, then you see as we release more calls, as we get more information, we'll call customers back and say, we've learned more, we're narrowing your window of your ETR, this is when we believe. You actually see a slight dip on the second call, but by the time we get to a third and even potentially fourth, depending on the storm event, we go back up to nearly 100%. We're very confident. Again, there's a window in the middle, and honestly, this is only 2 years old, so we're still learning through this, and we're trying to get better. And there's a lot of variables that are extremely challenging for us to navigate in terms of how many crews or what's the isolated event or things like that. So we're doing our best, but very high performance from like a statistical perspective. Now on the feeling side, it's very important for us, again, to understand how customers feel through these type of things. So we did targeted phone calls with customers who experienced outages during our last storm event to ask them questions about how do they feel, what was the messaging, was the messaging clear, did you understand what actions you need to take? Though I won't read the quotes that came directly from our customers, what I would say is our brand resonates through very strongly. So even in those really, really tough environments, our customers still believe what we're saying. They understand the messages. They give us grace. 3% of the time we're wrong. So clearly comes through in kind of the feeling side of this. Now I'm going to close on going back to the graphic I showed around JD Power and Escalent and some of that and how that shows up. So as you recall, maybe from 2024, we had a very challenging storm season. And we had just adopted some of this. This is relatively fresh. We were first overall in JD Power for residential customers. It's a huge thing. So as you look at some of these weighting and scores, though you may not attribute customer experience work directly to pricing, quality, things like that, but you can shift customers to a positive sentiment just based on looking at journey design, messaging, and key pieces of information. So I really wanted to say that. And as well as our scoring so far this year, again, we've seen a bump. We're performing again in first quartile in information provided and brand trust. Again, those are two indicators very strongly that link to ETR and kind of customer satisfaction as a whole. So I sped up as much as I could to try to get out of the way of you guys eating, but certainly open to any kind of comments or questions you have.
Thanks for using the ETR as the example to kind of pull the through line. I'm curious to how specifically AMI is going to continue to support ETR performance in the future once that's deployed. Any insights you want to share now?
Yeah, so there's, and Aaron can certainly talk from the systems perspective in terms of data, how the data will come to life, and it will probably shrink that 97%. That's our hope, right? Because we'll understand what customers are out, if they're still out, right? There will be more meaningful data for Aaron and some of the other systems that came along outside of the meters. So certainly Aaron can add. But on the customer experience side of it too, right, we'll be able to trigger more thoughtful communication. So in channels that customers want, right? So when AMI is fully on board, text, email, push notifications, things like that, customers drive that channel and it's more meaningful and impactful. We found in a recent study that customers prefer text. That's the path the whole industry is moving towards. That's not something we had capability of a month ago. Matter of fact, before our last go live, we didn't have that capability at all. So now we have that. And actually we're seeing some interesting, unique numbers since that go live where customers are adopting that. And you're going to hear more about that actually next month. But Aaron, do you have anything from a system that you'd want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add with the AMI, we'll know much quicker when a storm comes in of who's actually out much sooner. And then as we restore, we'll have that much better data of who's still left, where they're at. So we can get that messaging out there. There's customers we know that we sent an ETR message and they were already on, but they got that message. In the future, we can avoid that kind of confusing message that the customers might get because we'll know they're already on. And this will make sure that we don't miss anyone either, that someone maybe didn't get a message because they weren't included because they hadn't called in. We'll now know that with the new AMI meter. So it'll just help us be that much more accurate and get better information quicker for us to make decisions and create the ETRs. And as Matt's alluded to, ETRs are difficult no matter what, but having the best information possible will make it a little bit easier.
Just to round out the conversation a little bit and set the expectations, like you still have to know the extent of the damage. Right. So if I have 2,000 poles broken, I got to know that before I can really give you a good estimate of when things are going to come back. So there's that complexity that has to play. we talk about the good stuff, but there's things that have to happen behind the scenes. I also need to get better information from my folks that are in the field. We've started to deploy, as an example, some of our teams early on to get out and try to bring back information on the extent of damage, even before some of the line folks get to certain areas. So there's many pieces and parts, but really there is complexity, you know, is it going to take me 2 days to do the circuit or 3 because every tree's down? You don't always know until you get into it.
And that was going to be kind of my broad question, like, how do, you know, I'm looking at this before 2023, and then you get an ETR coordinator and all of this happens. Is it, so is it just that all of a sudden there was a person to feed all this information to then be able to synthesize it and say, okay, we can come up with a better restoration time? Is that kind of what happened?
It was beyond just the coordinator role. And as Troy mentioned, like there's a lot of folks on his side. As Troy just, this is what I talk about as CX being like an organizational discipline. What Troy just highlighted was that, right? There's a number of folks that have made key pathways open for folks like myself and Aaron and Kate Thomas, where we're getting information directly from a field soup who's seeing the polls down, right? Like that flow of information greatly improves the dialogue we can have with customers and the data that Aaron is then crunching. So it's incredibly complex, but it wasn't just that role. It was some key changes on flows of information and other data points.
And I'll tell you the other humongous change. That's a technical term. It's culture. And Matt, you deserve a lot of the credit and everybody else. When Director Bogner, you probably remember well when you and I were standing at Energy Plaza in front of cameras in 2021 doing a press conference. I had a lot of people in the company very nervous when I said, hey, we expect X% of outages to be resolved by tomorrow and another X% by the day after. I think that cannot be underestimated. The cultural change to say, yes, it's okay to be wrong. 3% wrong, because you have 97% of people who are going to be right. And we will continue to do things better to improve the 3% wrong. And then now you have this customer experience that we are gaining on the other side. Say it's just be courageous. It's okay not to have all the information, but there are thousands, tens of thousands of people who need this information, and we will get it right for them. Right. And I think that it's been a journey. It's now 4 years after that big storm in 2021. I'm super excited about what not only the tools that we have, but how the culture has changed, and we're doing amazing.
I appreciate that, Javier, and I may add that deliberation around culture really brings it back to customer experience, which is how do we view a problem through the lens of the customer? So we were kind of viewing it like in a good way, like we didn't want to be wrong. We didn't want to misinform a customer. We had to weigh that more effectively against putting ourselves in the shoes of the customer who's out and thinking about the sort of decisions they may have to make and when would they have to make them. And if I had some idea, I might make this decision versus a different decision. So that was an important part of the mental transition, I think, for the organization.
On that industry insights, that last one, that overall satisfaction drops 28% if restoration happens after ETR. I'd have to think that there's a bit of a grace period, and that percentage increases as you're further off the mark of ETR. And so I'm wondering, when we get 3% wrong, are we off an hour? Are we off a day? Or are we off multiple days? There's a gap there, I think.
There is, and Kate knows this data a little bit better than me, but the ETR data and when that last bullet point, there's actually a period if you get it, if you restore too early, where customer satisfaction drops. Consider.
Oh, because maybe they've made decisions.
Right.
They can't.
Yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic. Usually I think it's about a 2-hour window that you want to center on.
Yeah.
The grace is usually up to an hour early and a couple hours late, usually is the way that works. Now, when we talk about storm ETRs, it's important to know global ETRs are set by day, by end of day, usually, because we're dealing with so many factors. We're just trying to give broad strokes, and we're doing this so early on. We're just trying to give customers broad strokes. Is it going to be a 1-day storm event? Is it going to be a 3-day? What are we looking at? But on a blue sky outage, where you know very particularly, usually you want to set it and try to get it within that 3-hour window. Otherwise, customer satisfaction falls on your side.
Thank you.
We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. With that, it is time to break for lunch. Let's be back at 10 till 1, please. 12:50. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're gonna start this afternoon with Mr. Underwood talking about electric utility industry and inflationary cost pressures.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I thought I'd start us off with a brief humor moment, just because I need it. So sorry about that. In 1930, you could buy a Snickers for 5 cents. 5 cents.
Must know my dad.
Well, so if you're me, the question is, what happened? Why is it not 5 cents anymore? Why is it $1, $1.50, or whatever it is? And so we got some feedback from one of the committees, which was really helpful, is maybe we should spend a bit of time talking about inflation and some of the different nuances of inflation and the type of inflation we wear and have to manage. And so that's what the next kind of 5 or 6 slides are set up to do. So if we could clip to the next slide, please, Ms. Lynn. So let's just lay a base here. What's inflation? Most of us know that it's the rise in overall prices for goods or services in an economy. It's not just the cost of one item going up like a Snickers. Usually it's a basket of goods. It's a cluster of things that are rising. The way we track inflation in America, compliments of the Fed and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is oftentimes we look at inflation through sectors. And so different sectors of the economy are going to experience different levels of inflation, usually because of the underlying issues in that sector, as well as some of the macro issues around purchasing power and the erosion of purchasing power, in this case of the US dollar. And so different indexes use different methods to kind of get different angles at how we look at inflation. And so if we could continue here through the next slide, Ms. Lane. So I'd like to talk about 3 of them. CPI, which I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with. So what does it cost to buy a good? The difference in what it costs to buy a good and producing the good are different things, as many of us will recall. So the second one is producer price index. So producer price index doesn't necessarily look at what it takes to buy the goods. It takes at the manufacturing level what it takes to produce the goods. And so that's another one of those lenses that we can look at when we're having the inflation conversation. The last lens, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this today, but personal consumption index, PCE index, that's also a good barometer for us for where our goods and services going that we buy for personal consumption. We all do this throughout our day. So let's go to the next slide if we could, please. Here's a look at the 8 main categories that the Bureau of Labor Statistics produces a CPI for. And so I won't read them down, but they're on the slide. And then energy prices are also included in the CPI, and they're part of the goods and services purchased by customers, specifically within housing and transportation major groups. So the indexes shown in this presentation are going to start at a base value of 100 in January of 2020. And the next cluster of slides are going to be an amalgamation of either the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the St. Louis Fed for specific goods or sectors of goods. So if we go to the next slide, please. Here's a look at CPI for food. So we all go to the grocery store, thankfully, and we're all buying food for ourselves or our family. And if you look at that vertical line in the image, it's snapped right at 2020. We snapped it at 100. And then everything to the right is the inflation index CPI for food since 2020. Everything to the left is pre-2020, going back to the early 2000s, mid-early 2000s. And so the first thing you notice is just the different shape relative to the index point of everything to the right really has a much steeper profile. And the last 4 or 5 years, anybody that's bought groceries, I'm sure has felt this. And so this is, you know, the erosion of the dollar and the purchasing power not being the same as what it used to be. And the percentage there is 31% higher now than it was in 2020. So that's for food. Let's go to the next slide if we can. CPI index for electricity. So same scheme on the image, DMARC of 2020, same axis at the bottom. And you can look at the different profile to the right of 2020 versus to the left of 2020. This number is not 31%. This number is 38%. So the CPI index for urban electricity is 38% higher than what it was in 2020. So very significant.
Really interesting here is the that period from 2017 to 2021 also coincided with our period of no general rate increase, and you see that very flat. And so I think it's not directly correlated, but I think there is some correlation. You can see bigger increases in the price of the inputs that are shown in the graph.
Yep. And when we came out of the no general rate increase, we started to see this really move. Pre that, or during that time period, it was kind of at that manageable level. A lot of times the target's 2% or something close to that. And so we've just shifted off that. It's just different. So the next slide, please. PPI. So what does it cost to produce these things? So I'm going to look at my phone here because my memory is not what it used to be. If you look at our financial statements and you looked at gross plant, so gross electric system plant, at the end of 2024, our talented accounting team told us there's $6.7 billion of gross plant out in the system. If you take the depreciation out of it, it's $4.3 billion. So we have a lot of net plant. And if my neighbor were to ask me, hey, what are the commodities or what are the components of that net plant primarily made of? I would answer with those 3 things, probably in order of significance. They're made of steel, and then copper, and then concrete. So earlier in the discussion, we looked at CPI, the cost to buy, and now we're going to look at PPI for the people that are producing these commodities. What is it costing them to produce? So it's just a different lens to look at the same sort of metric of inflation. So let's go to the next slide if we could, Ms. Lane. So here's the PPI for cement and concrete product manufacturing. Very similar jump. Let's get to the punchline, which is at the bottom. It's 43% higher. 43% higher than in 2020. An enormous jump just to produce, not just to buy. We go to the next slide. Let's take a look at copper, I believe. Copper and copper products, 63% higher. So copper being a primary conductor of electricity in many different settings, 63% higher than it was in 2020. And the third component we'll take a look at here, if that's okay, is steel, I believe. Ms. Lane, if you would. Cold rolled steel. Here's cold rolled steel. So really, you see a non-linear jump. I'm not even sure really how to describe that other than a hockey stick jump about 2022. And then it's kind of tapered a bit. It's come down some, which has been helpful, but it's still 33% higher than in 2020. So our primary commodities that we use to build, maintain, and operate the system have had those order of magnitude jumps, 33%, 63%, 38%, if I recall correctly. Very, very significant jumps in the cost to produce them. Go to the next slide, please. So what does this mean for us? How are we thinking about this? How are we managing this? So the combination of both inadequate supply and inordinate demand. We're experiencing an inflationary pressure on both sides of the transaction. We don't have enough of these things, and too many people want too much of them. So that's what's going on, and that's, I think, generally forecasted to be a sustained challenge. The price increases are both to sustain that $4.3 billion of net plant. We have to continue to invest in the assets, even if we don't grow their capacity or enlarge the capabilities. We have to continue to invest in this $4.3 billion machine that keeps us alive and well and powers modern life. The inflation affects both the investment in sustain, but then also expand. A lot of time, most of the conversation is around expansion and growing the system and serving new customers and maintaining reliability and have higher safety margins. It's both sustain and expand. One of the things that we're trying to do more of, and this is a discipline that we perpetually invest in, is we want to concentrate our spend profiles among a small amount of providers. So functionally what we're doing is we're trying to basket a lot of goods that we buy and leverage them at one provider and drive our prices down. So for them, it's scale and volume, and for us, it's competitive pricing. And we continue to do that for more and more categories. We also continue to open up the competitive sourcing process. So just because we have one provider doesn't necessarily mean we're getting the best price. Maybe we need to leverage our spend across multiple providers in an RFP setting. So Steve Palmer and our supply chain continue to invest in that. Troy Vai has talked to us in the past around preferred suppliers for system expansion. And how do we leverage the total spend that we have, which is quite large, against a specific set of vendors to drive value, price, and optionality. So we're going to continue to do those things. But the last bullet point there is that this is going to continue to be a challenge for us for some time. We're doing the best that we can, but it's gotten to a point where our ability to moot the impacts to our customers is becoming limited by the scale and duration of the rise in prices. And so when we had been talking about this in the committee setting, one of the committees, I believe it was finance, had asked, or maybe systems, apologize, can we have some of this information brought to the all committee? So that's what we're trying to do today. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Would you be able to characterize like that producer price index? I assume that raw fuel also has a graph, you know, coal, natural gas.
Yeah.
What percentages are we seeing there?
If you'll allow me, I'll go from memory.
Yep, that's fine. And then we can follow up with real ones.
I'm very confident in the direction of my answers.
Okay.
The price for coal as a commodity, as a fuel source, continues to kind of come down slowly. There's two components of that. There's buying the commodity and transportation. And those, for us, those are the two drivers of that fuel type for us. Natural gas, as many of us know, tends to be a little bit more volatile in its movement. And so I don't have the spot price of gas. I probably should, but it historically has been for a while about $2.50 in BTU. And it's been, which is just I was listening to currency in which sort of gas volumes are measured. And that kind of has moved up to 3.5, something like that. I see Gina nodding her head, and I appreciate that. And I think that's largely been because of the demand. But there's a lot of variables in that discussion as far as what drives the gas up.
You'd say 100% increase then, if we're thinking about it in the same terms of what we're seeing here with the producer price index numbers?
Depending on when you measure it, because it'll move around on you.
Yeah.
Probably something like 50 to 100% might be a reasonable thing to say.
Another important data point here is Brad talked about the inputs, the main inputs, so copper and steel. But when those are transformed into final products, transformed into transformers, that's when we start to see a very steep increase, right? So it's not uncommon, depending on the type of transformer that we're buying today, it's not uncommon for us to see anywhere between 200 and 300% price increase in a matter of 3 years. And those are non-discretionary. Right? We as a utility, we have to buy those. And I equate that, I spoke to employees a while ago, and I was telling them, imagine you're buying a house, not a house, a car. The average new vehicle, passenger vehicle in the United States costs about $45,000. Imagine that vehicle 4 years ago, and now I were to tell you, now you have to buy that vehicle for $200,000. And you have no option, you have to, right? From our perspective. That's the price shock that us and virtually every other utility in the nation is facing when you're doing that. And that's, if you get lucky and you can actually get those deliveries on time. That's the other piece. One of the reasons why prices are so high is because there's a lot of demand and not enough supply.
That's the manufacturing side of the equipment structure. I'm curious about labor cost then, right? Like we're hiring massive contractors to do all that stuff.
Yeah, it's all embedded in there, right? It's the lack of qualified labor.
Supply and demand issue as well. Yeah, so I guess my question is, can we characterize, like, part of this, I think, for us is helping us understand where the pressure is coming from in terms of the cost of doing business. Help us understand from a labor perspective what those cost pressures are. They're going up, but like,
So let me, there's a couple ways of looking at this. So for standard distribution type work, we tend to have a little bit longer term contracts, and I would characterize those probably 3 to 4% change. Where some of the changes are really starting to see are these big projects, these mega projects. I can't give you an estimate there, but we know it's significant. Most of that has to do with the volume of activities, right? So you have large contractors now turning down jobs across the United States because they're full up.
Right.
And so once you start to get to that level, then your cost to perform that service continues to go up. So it really kind of depends on which piece and part you're working. So T&D has been pretty consistent. The generation piece, I'd say, because of the demand. And if you think of a lot of the large projects, bridge works, data centers, things of that nature, all of them are competing for the same type of crap.
Any other questions? Thanks, Brett. With that, we'll go on to, we'll go into governance and board matters. I'll pass it to Mr. Foch.
I think we'll figure out. Do we want to stand here or sit from where we are as we present? I do like the new setup and layout, and I want to thank Aaron and everyone for making that happen. This is a time of year where we look at the 2026 board meeting schedule and we approve it. There's a variety of reasons for doing this. Primarily, I would say for planning, not only for us, for those external stakeholders such as vendors and others who may be interested in knowing when those dates are. So we typically approve those. You would typically review and approve those here in September. There are no exceptions or anything that seems to be out of process. We'll continue to meet on the third Thursday of the month at Omaha Douglas Civic Center at 5 p.m. Aaron has confirmed the availability of that with the Douglas Civic Center. And then we'll meet here on the Tuesday that precedes the third Thursday.
And the other thing I would just offer up here is that the board governance workshop, as a matter of process, is included in this calendar as well. That's the 27th of August. So hopefully this is helpful to everyone. And are there any questions?
No federal holiday conflict.
No federal holiday conflicts. Juneteenth is not overlapping with one of our board meetings this time. June 18th is. We did confirm that. They are open.
Great. Anybody have questions? Thank you.
Excellent. And the next is just a policy refinement. The GP 14 really highlights the board expense reimbursement policy. You, of course, as board members are entitled to submit expenses for reimbursement that are incurred in the performance of your duties as directors. This policy was surveyed both in 2024 and 2025 by the board policy survey, and there were a few comments that led us to want to review it. If we go to the next slide. We followed kind of the process that we do for SDs, except I would recognize that there is no need for this type of policy. Generally speaking, the GPs and BLs do not go out for public. So it really just becomes a board's decision. And that's what we're really here to talk about today. As we reviewed the process, if we go to the policy rather, there were a few things that became evident that we had an opportunity to do to make the policy stronger. One was, and we'll see it clean copy here in a second, but there was an opportunity to clarify policy language. There was some confusion about what was reimbursable, what wasn't, what were the limits, that type of thing. And then actually how we go about doing the reimbursement. There was an opportunity for us to reflect how it had moved and evolved in process. Third was, everyone is incredibly committed to ethical and fiduciary standards. As a policy, we just hadn't called that out. And really, it's an opportunity for the board to call out through the form of policy that commitment that you hold very dear. So we added that. And then finally, just to align with the overall administrative practices. This is a 4-page policy. So if we go to the next pages, and the next page is still. What you see is it was redlined significantly. So I would call it kind of a rewrite, even though in spirit and intent, it's primarily a rewrite because it was just clarifying and I think providing things that were a bit more meaningful. So if we go to the next slide, you see what was really proposed in terms of the overall language to move forward. I'll just highlight a couple of things. The first section really provides with some level of clarity what eligible expenses are. The second section identifies indeed there are some limitations. The third section talks to the approval and documentation process. This changes. One of the things that will happen that's been in this policy is that the board's treasurer will be the person who will facilitate that, but the board will be the person to take a look at a board member's proposed expenses and review and approve that. Currently, it goes through the process where it comes internally and it goes to Javier. It would be very awkward for me to review and approve such expenses of somebody reporting up to me, if that makes sense. Yes, it is. So this is really an enhancement of process and recognizes that an officer of the board will be reviewing and approving those expenses just as a matter of process. Now, the board treasurer, of course, has an opportunity to have his or her expenses approved as well. And it's important that they're not approving their own. So the board chair would be approving those of the board treasurer. Again, we'll facilitate all of that, but I thought that was an important change just to highlight. Finally, we did build in a process of a dispute resolution that made it clear. So if for some reason there was somebody submitting an expense or wanted that expense to be approved, and the treasurer had a question about whether or not that was an expense that should be approved, it gets moved over to the risk committee for a thoughtful deliberation ultimately and to make a decision. They'd be making a recommendation to the board, and the board would make the determination as to whether or not to move forward with that expense. In all of my time here, that has never been an issue, but as a matter of policy, it seems prudent to build into it. There's the overall statement of ethical and fiduciary responsibility, really tying that to OPPD's Code of Ethics and Business Conduct, which the board has approved, so just making reference to that. And then finally, there is a commitment, basically the risk committee does review the expenses on an annual basis through a form of a report, and such report could be made available as a matter of public record. Hopefully everyone finds this a little bit more simple, straightforward, and scratching whatever itch may have surfaced in the initial surveying. So next slide. Questions that we generally ask. Is there anything that requires further clarification, anything that you really like, or anything that you'd like the committee to consider before moving this forward to board approval? 7-second rule feels good. It's good. I would just highlight on the next slide, I think that there are going to be some implementation considerations, and I really include this more for illustrative purposes, that we intend to make sure that this process runs smoothly for all of you. That if there's any questions or issues along the way, certainly Aaron and I are here to provide the support that's needed to work through the process and make sure it works as seamlessly as we feel it should. And finally, the recommendation is really about whether or not this feels like it's ready for board's vote, or if it should be going back to committee for additional deliberation. Any concerns with moving it forward? None for me. Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the confirmation of board meeting agenda, but I wanted to take a chance, new agenda style for us. I've appreciated it so far. It's been a little bit bumpy. That's on me. But I think it's a good step in the right direction from what we came out of with the governance workshop. And thank you, Mr. Foch, for bringing this forward and creating this. I appreciate it. With that, are there any directors that want to move any consent items to discussion action items for Thursday?
SD9.
SD9. Okay. Aaron, if you captured item number 10, please. Seeing nothing else, I think we can move on from that. So next on our agenda would be the opportunity for public comment on items of district business. I think I see a comment in the room, so we'll take comments in the room first and then via WebEx. Ma'am, you can come up to the podium if you're ready. If you wish to make a comment, please state your name, address, the name of any organization or person you represent. Each individual commenting will be allotted 3 minutes per matter pending. To assist you, we'll use the timer on the screen. This lane will signal you when 30 seconds remain, as well as when time is up. If you have written materials, please deliver them to Ms. Lane.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Himmelsath. I am a member of Sacred Heart Church, which is part of the historic 24th Street Family of Parishes in North Omaha. Last Saturday, we hosted a pilgrimage, which was putting emphasis on the environment. I'd like to read the letter that came out of that. Dear OPPD board members and leadership, as participants in the pilgrimage of hope for creation, we write today out of concern for the health of our neighbors in North Omaha, the integrity of God's creation, and our shared future. Grounded in faith, we believe that care for our common home is a sacred duty. Our community, and we might add the whole earth, is struggling with environmental harm. North Omaha has carried the burden of coal pollution from the North Omaha station for generations. Despite plans for retirement, coal burning continues until at least 2026, exposing residents to toxic emissions. This is a matter of public health and environmental justice. Sulfur dioxide, fine particulate matter, and ground level ozone are linked to asthma, heart attacks, strokes, and premature death. These risks are well documented, and North Omaha's asthma rates remain nearly triple the state average. We respectfully urge OPPD to accelerate the transition away from coal and ensure no further delays in retiring the North Omaha Station's coal burning units. Second, publicly commit to a just transition, including protection for workers. Thirdly, continue and expand transparency and community engagement in North Omaha, including regular reporting of emissions, accessible public forums, and partnerships with local health and environmental groups. The scriptures and Catholic social teaching remind us that we are called to serve as stewards of creation. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis taught us integral ecology that recognizes the inseparable link between environmental degradation and human suffering. Our pilgrimage is both spiritual and public. It is an expression of hope, solidarity, and call to action. We call you to walk with us toward clean air and environmental justice in hope and faith. And it's signed by 163 persons. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any other, Aaron, there aren't any other people in the room, are there?
No.
Okay. We'll move on to WebEx comments. For WebEx attendees, if you wish to make a comment, please send the meeting host a message using the chat feature or utilize the hand raise feature. Detailed instructions can be found on the OPPD website at the link shown on the screen. When I call on a member of the public to speak, please confirm that we can hear you before commencing with your comments. Please state your name, address, and the name of the organization or person you represent. Each individual will be allotted 3 minutes per matter pending. To assist you, we'll use the timer on the screen and signal you when 30 seconds remain, as well as when time is up. If you have written materials, please email them to corporatesecretary@oppd.com and they will be received on our behalf. Are there any comments online?
David Corbin.
If you can hear me, go ahead and start, please.
Hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. David Corbin, representing the Nebraska Sierra Club, 1002 North 49th Street. Since SD9 is so closely related to SD7 on certain aspects, I was hoping that today's presentation might address interim goals towards your 2050 net zero goal. Maybe I'll look forward to that in the future. And as you talked about your energy load expanding, I'm hoping that you're considering not just how AI and data centers will create energy demands, but to consider how AI can help. For example, AI-enabled DER integration is a promising technology that has the potential to revolutionize the way that DERs are integrated into the grid. I hope you're looking into that. You talked about planning for increases in extreme weather events without mentioning that fossil fuel use is related to the cause of many of those extreme weather events. And I was hoping that sometime we can hear more about expanding underground transmission lines, which would also fit into problems with storms. And I was going to talk about the pilgrimage, but it was just talked about in excellent detail. There's just one thing I'd like to add to that pilgrimage that ended right there at the North Omaha coal plant. As we were there, we could see the coal coming out and we could see the coal dust from that big coal pile just blowing in the wind. Fortunately, that day it wasn't blowing towards us, but it was blowing towards someone. And we didn't see the coal dust, even though it's there, that blows off the coal trains. And especially when you can see that there are those large number of children who are on that adjacent sports field breathing that in. Also, I appreciate the follow-up call regarding my question in a previous meeting about OPPD's communications with the Douglas County Board. And one last topic that is not related to Sierra Club, but just to what's been going on in my neighborhood. It's not easy to determine who to contact when there is a streetlight outage or some other problem with the streetlight. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, are there any other comments online?
No other comments?
Just maybe a public service announcement. Tim, could we do a quick audible on how do people report on street
Thank you.
lights?
Certainly. Well, one of the helpful facts will be with the new outage map. That'll have some additional functionality around the ability to report streetlight outages and for people to get updates on that. And it'll enable them to give us some more precise information as well about streetlight reporting.
Is that available today?
I believe it is. Yeah, the streetlight function is.
It's on an app, my app.
It is on the app.
All right. Thank you.
Correction, the app isn't available yet, but on the mobile optimized outage map will be.
Could you clarify that for me, please? It's,
I think is.
Yeah, on the
Yes,
website. Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, if you pull that up on your phone, it'll be mobile optimized for viewability.
Appreciate it. All right, thank you for the comment in the room and the comment online. We have an afternoon closed session. We'll reconvene in closed session this afternoon to discuss one topic, strategic governance issues. And we will also, I apologize, we'll also discuss, we did not complete our strategic risk and resource adequacy. So this afternoon's closed session will cover strategic governance issues and our morning follow-up of strategic risk resource adequacy. Director Spurgeon, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
Yes, I move that the board go into closed session at this time. It's not what the clock says. 39, perhaps it is, PM, to discuss two topics. One, strategic governance issues, and the second, strategic risk resource adequacy.
And with respect to both of those items, the closed session is necessary to keep in the public interest because its purpose to review governance policies, GP2, governance focus, GP3 board job description, and board staff linkage policy. BL7 delegation to the president and chief executive officer. This discussion will focus on how the board and executive leadership work together to clarify and strengthen performance, governance, effectiveness, and organizational health. It's being conducted in closed session because the discussion may involve personnel and performance matters that could harm reputations if discussed in public. For this closed session, we need a motion, and that motion requires a second. Sorry, we need a second. And then Ms. Lane.
Wagner. Yes. Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Howard. Online. Hudson.
Yes.
Moody.
Yes.
Surgeon.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right, thank you. The motion to go into closed session is passed. This closed session will be limited to strategic governance issues and strategic risk resource adequacy. No votes or other board action will be taken. All right, a motion and a second is required to reconvene in open session.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Lane?
Wagner. Yes. Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Howard. Online. Hudson.
Yes.
Moody.
Yes.
Surgeon.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. The motion to come out of closed session at 5:08 PM is carried. The closed session was limited to discussing two topics: strategic governance issues and strategic risk resource adequacy. No votes or other board action were taken. And with that, we're adjourned.